economic staff a ginormous inappropriate hug for working together and actually caring. This has been one of my fixations for years and years and years, and I'm sure it is for you too. Yes. The exploitation, particularly of our seniors, using technology, other things, and the technology is getting creepy. We just had an incident in my district office where the woman was receiving phone calls and the voice was her grandchild. It had been mined off of apparently a Facebook post or something of that nature. You are all our experts on the criminal side. We'll have a second panel behind this that I think will talk a little bit about our technology opportunities. As each of you speak, if you have any additional time at the end of your testimony, there is a personal fixation. How do we not make this the money's gone out the door and we're chasing it? How do we develop a culture, whether it be law enforcement, education, or technology, that makes it so the exploitation never goes out the door? Do you want to do opening?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Chairman Schweikert, especially for partnering with me on today's hearing, and to the staffs on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers. They've done a lot of work to get us prepared for today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of our witnesses, and I'm grateful to you all for being here. Last year, scams accounted for nearly $500 billion in losses and now surpass the drug trade as an illicit industry, which I find stunning. Americans are a favorite target of scammers, with the FBI reporting more than $16 billion stolen through online scams in 2024. That's a 370% increase in just over 5 years. Other estimates project that true American losses total more than $100 billion every year, because, of course, not everybody reports their losses when they've been victims of a scam. The losses are staggering, and I'm sure that everyone here and all who are watching the hearing have received calls and texts about unpaid tolls, too good to be true job offers, or supposedly urgent investment opportunities. But this is obviously more than just a nuisance. This is an urgent economic danger that empties bank accounts, steals life savings, and disrupts the lives of countless people. People like one man, a constituent of mine from Derry, New Hampshire, who contacted my office last week because his nearly 80-year-old mother lost $80,000 in savings to fraudsters who impersonated the FBI over the phone. Her son described compiling case details and evidence for law enforcement, the FBI, and his mother's bank, but he's still struggling to get help. He's also unsure whether federal authorities have taken any action. Scams like these are a bipartisan challenge that impact Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. And unfortunately, AI, social media, and other technologies are making scams more convincing and widespread, to the chairman's example just now. And that requires us to step up our efforts significantly. Public and private sector leaders, Congress, law enforcement, federal agencies, the U.S. companies across many industries have to strengthen our collective work to protect Americans. So that's why I launched a comprehensive effort last year to investigate the ways in which scammers are using tools and platforms from U.S. companies to target Americans, and also how we should go about strengthening the federal response to this threat. I also launched a nationwide survey of scam victims to better understand the financial losses and other challenges that these individuals face. People who want to fill out that survey can do so at hassan.senate.gov. And I'm working with Senator Rick Scott on a bipartisan bill that addresses some of the key challenges that we've identified through our investigation so far. Our bill would create a central, secure website for Americans to report scams and get assistance, as well as a comprehensive federal strategy to prevent scams, again to the chairman's point, and hold scammers accountable to the fullest extent of the law. So I really look forward to today's discussion to further inform these and other efforts across Congress to combat scams. The witnesses with us are on the front lines of the fight against scams, and I thank you all for your hard work. I really want all of us here today to work constructively to meet the urgency of this moment and protect Americans and our economy. And finally, I ask for unanimous consent to submit statements for the record from they are from Kent Westbrook, founder and CEO of the Stop Scams Alliance, Aaron West, founder and CEO of Operation Shamrock, the American Bakers Association, and CTIA, a trade association representing the U.S. wireless communications industry. I look forward to our discussion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And we're going to try to talk you into my mark and reprisal bill, being able to find some other ways to get the bad guys. All right, forgive me, we're going to do this fairly quickly, then I'm going to stand up and run back across the mall, vote, and come right back. Richard Goldberg is an associate counsel of the fraud section from the Department of Justice. He is also chair of the Global Anti-Fraud Enforcement Network. Mr. Gregory Heeb, did I say that right? Heeb is the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI Criminal Division. Amongst his many responsibilities, he oversees the Financial Crimes Section. Ms. Karen Siefert, and Siefert's a famous name in Scottsdale, is the Director of the Scam Center Strike Force under the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. She leads the Strike Force efforts to disable and prosecute industrial scam compounds in Southeast Asia.
And I'm introducing Lois Greisman, head of the Division of Marketing Practices in the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection. At the FTC, Ms. Greisman directs the agency's fraud program and leads law enforcement initiatives that tackle telemarketing fraud, fraudulent investment opportunity schemes, and illegal spam, among other activities. Ms. Greisman also directs the FTC's work to curb fraud in connection with different methods of payment, such as credit cards. And our final witness is Reva Price, who is Commissioner of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. The commission monitors, investigates, and reports to Congress on the national security implications of the bilateral trade and economic relationship between the United States and China, and provides recommendations where appropriate. So again, welcome to all our witnesses, and Mr. Goldberg, we will start with your testimony, please.
Thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Richard Goldberg. I'm an associate counsel with the fraud section of the U.S. Department of Justice. Cryptocurrency investment fraud schemes have been growing at an alarming rate for years, victimizing Americans in every part of the country. One leading blockchain analysis platform estimates that $17 billion was stolen globally in cryptocurrency scams in 2025. In the U.S., our statistics come from victim reports filed with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3. In 2024, IC3 recorded over $5.8 billion in loss to cryptocurrency investment fraud. Year-over-year growth in cryptocurrency victimization shows a 154% increase in the number of complaints and 92% increase in the amount of loss recorded. Where does cryptocurrency investment fraud come from? Southeast Asia is a hub of this scam activity, with Burma, Cambodia, and Laos hosting large-scale compounds devoted to fraud. The compounds often are filled with trafficked and enslaved persons held against their will, who are beaten if they do not make enough money from their victims. In the compounds, the trafficked victims are trained to scam and ordered to target Americans to steal their wealth. The masterminds behind these operations are believed to be Chinese organized crime syndicates enabled by lack of government regulation in the country where the scam compounds are found. On March 6, 2026, the President issued an executive order that directly addressed this threat, entitled Combating Cybercrime, Fraud, and Predatory Schemes Against American Citizens. Through this EO, the President is unleashing every available tool to stop foreign-backed criminal networks that exploit vulnerable Americans through cyber-enabled fraud. The U.S. will not simply play defense. The nation will use its offensive capacity to dismantle the organized crime groups at the heart of these scams. Over the past several years, the Department of Justice has substantially increased its fight against cryptocurrency investment fraud schemes, the scam compounds that perpetrate the crimes, and the networks that launder their fraud proceeds. Many department components and U.S. attorneys' offices across the country have brought complementary cases against South Asian scam center operators and facilitators. One sterling example is the Scam Center Strike Force, conceived and founded by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, under the leadership of U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro. In a few moments, my colleague, Karen Siefert, will provide additional detail about this strike force, which combines the prosecutorial resources of the U.S. Attorney here in D.C. with those of the department's criminal division. The strike force is doing superb work fighting the battle against scam centers, but it is not acting alone. For example, in October 2025, the department's National Security Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York unsealed an indictment charging PRC and Cambodian national Chen Zhe, the founder and chairman of Prince Holding Group, for allegedly directing forced labor scam compounds in Cambodia. At the same time, the department announced it had seized and filed a complaint to forfeit Bitcoin then valued at approximately $15 billion, representing the criminal proceeds of Chen Zhe's fraud and money laundering schemes. This was the largest cryptocurrency seizure in history. These are only a few examples of the department's efforts against scam centers that are devastating American households. The Department of Justice is unwavering in its commitment to halt cyber-enabled scams. With the recently issued executive order, we are confident that all components of the federal government will join together to achieve maximum disruption of South Asian scam centers. The DOJ is committed to assisting the agencies tasked with implementing the President's executive order. We thank Congress for bringing attention to this problem and look forward to discussing ways that together we can enhance the nation's capacity to achieve justice for victims and prevent harm to additional Americans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Heeb, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Gregory Heeb. I'm the Deputy Assistant Director of the Criminal Division of the FBI. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the FBI's efforts to combat overseas scam compounds. Over the past decade, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, has reported exponential growth in the victimization of U.S. citizens from cyber-enabled fraud. That is fraud that is carried out through the use of the internet or other digital technologies. Last year alone, the FBI's IC3 received over 450,000 cyber scam-related complaints, with reported losses exceeding $17.7 billion. That's in 2025. While all Americans are affected, adults aged 60 and older accounted for approximately a quarter of the complaints filed and 42% of the losses. Unfortunately, we know these figures are likely much higher, as victims often do not file reports due to embarrassment, fear of losing their independence, or because they didn't realize that they had been victimized. The impact on victims can be devastating, as many lose their retirement savings, their home, or their entire life savings. Victims often experience shame, isolation, depression, and lasting psychological harm. These scams are successful because they rely on social engineering, which is the use of psychological manipulation to create heightened emotion and a sense of urgency, and even play on feelings of isolation. The scammers have become very adept at exploiting a victim's trust and respect for authority. Increasingly, the scammers are also using artificial intelligence to enhance their credibility through deep fake voice, video, and image technology, as well as to create grammatically correct correspondence. In recent years, the FBI has observed a significant rise in reported losses tied to online scams, including tech support, romance scams, and cryptocurrency investment fraud schemes. Much of this activity can be traced to organized operations based in parts of Southeast Asia. The FBI has been aggressively combating these scams on every front. We rely upon our international presence, our skill at advancing aggressive, complex enterprise investigations, our public awareness campaigns, and our partnerships, including with the United States Attorney's Office, District of Columbia Scam Center Strike Force. These partnerships are critical as the geographic distance and jurisdictional challenges require trust in sustained collaboration. The FBI, together with our partners in the United States Secret Service, are proactively identifying victims of cryptocurrency investment fraud through Operation Level Up, using sophisticated techniques to identify and notify victims who are being actively defrauded. Since inception of this initiative in 2024, together we have notified 8,390 victims and estimate savings of $529 million as a result of these efforts. We are keenly aware that law enforcement alone cannot solve a threat that is global, digital, highly adaptive, and lucrative for those who perpetrate it. Addressing the threat requires sustained coordination across the government, law enforcement, and the private sector. This is not simply about fraud prevention, but also protecting Americans, safeguarding our nation's wealth, and defending the integrity of our infrastructure. Thank you again for having me here today.
Thank you, Mr. Heeb, for your testimony. Ms. Siefert, you're recognized for yours.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you to the chairman for the introduction. I'm Karen Siefert, the director of the Scam Center Strike Force, and on behalf of U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro, I thank you for the opportunity to share the work of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia to combat overseas scam compounds. Scam compounds perpetrating cyber-enabled fraud schemes target Americans, and they use America's infrastructure. They use U.S. social media companies to recruit trafficked labor and to meet their victims. They use U.S. satellite providers and VPN networks to connect to the internet. They use American data storage companies to store their training documents, and they use American-hosted .com websites to defraud their victims. In Southeast Asia, the masterminds behind this nearly $40 billion per year industry are Chinese organized crime syndicates. This threat has created a generational wealth transfer from Main Street America to the Chinese transnational organized crime syndicates. Last year, U.S. Attorney Pirro launched a first-of-its-kind Scam Center Strike Force. The Strike Force focuses on investigating and disabling the worst industrialized scam centers operating in Southeast Asia, specifically those in Cambodia, Burma, and Laos. The Strike Force's 4 main goals are as follows. First, to seize and disable U.S.-based infrastructure that is the manner and means of scam compound operations. Second, to identify and charge the leaders of scam compounds, including the Chinese organized crime affiliates, and to seek to bring them to justice in the United States. Third, to trace and seize stolen cryptocurrency funds and to return those to the victims to the fullest extent of the law. And fourth, to prevent further victimization through public education. The Strike Force is a collaboration between the U.S. Attorney's Office and our partners at the Maine Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Secret Service. On select matters, we also partner with the Postal Inspection Service, the Internal Revenue Service, the Rhode Island U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Western District of Washington U.S. Attorney's Office. We have approximately 150 personnel, which includes prosecutors, law enforcement, and support staff located across the country. And the Strike Force seeks to use all government tools available to combat this threat. Additionally, we routinely partner with the Department of State, the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, and the Department of Commerce. It's through these various means that we evaluate the Strike Force's success in several different ways. These successes include, of course, charging and prosecuting individuals who operate the scam centers, but also taking compounds offline, seizing websites that facilitate the fraud, designating entities that are running the compounds with OFAC, and seizing the cryptocurrency that is the driver of the fraud. Recently, the Scam Center Strike Force announced that it had frozen, seized, or forfeited already $580 million in cryptocurrency of funds that were all tied to scams. The Strike Force also cooperates with foreign partners. We are actively working in Southeast Asian countries. Notably, we have a strong connection with Thai law enforcement, and we have deployed FBI staff and agents have embedded with the Royal Thai Police War Room Task Force to combat scams arising out of Cambodia and Burma. Additionally, the Strike Force is strategically collaborating with U.S. companies. Private industry is and should be concerned about the use of their infrastructure to commit scams. It degrades the trust in these networks that Americans have. The strike force works proactively with private companies to cut off scam centers' access to U.S. infrastructure and to identify the networks of perpetrators that are using U.S. infrastructure. The strike force is also committed to education of Americans, especially of older Americans and their families, about how to identify and stop scams. We are collaborating with the Postal Inspection Service and private industry regarding a wide public education campaign. U.S. Attorney Pirro has made multiple public service announcements, given keynote speeches at conferences, and engaged the U.S. press to attempt to get the word out about this threat. We look forward to continuing this critical work with your support.
Thank you very much. Ms. Greisman, you're recognized for your testimony.
Good afternoon, Senator Hassan, and I appreciate your kind introduction. I'm Lois Greisman, Associate Director of the Division of Marketing Practices at the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Commission's efforts to combat fraud. Please note that my oral presentation and any responses to questions are my own and do not reflect those of the Commission or any individual commissioner. Fighting fraud is at the core of the FTC's consumer protection mission. Consumer reports, also referred to as consumer complaints, provide a fundamental underpinning of the FTC's fraud program. The reports are stored in the Consumer Sentinel Network, a unique, secure online database that the FTC makes available to its law enforcement partners across federal, state, local levels, as well as some international partners. Notably, the Sentinel Network receives reports from nearly 180 different data sources, including IC3, of course, other government groups, industry, and consumer groups. In 2025, consumers submitted 3 million fraud reports to the Sentinel Network, reporting $15.9 billion in losses. And as noted by my colleagues and in their testimony, underreporting, and as you noted, underreporting is serious. We know that fraud losses are actually a fraction of what is going on out there. So from the Sentinel data, we know that imposter scams, government and business imposters, top the list since 2020. In 2025, the Commission received over 1 million reports about imposter frauds, with consumers reporting more than $3.5 billion in losses. And also consistent with the written testimony of my colleagues, aggregate consumer loss is greatest in connection with investment scams. In 2025, consumers reported more than $7.9 billion in losses, with an average individual loss of more than $10,000. So the FTC analyzes the Sentinel data to identify targets and also to build cases. In fiscal year 2025, the Commission brought more than 40 law enforcement actions. One such case was against defendants in IM Mastery Academy for allegedly operating an investment training and business venture scam that's taken in over $1 billion from consumers around the world. To address cross-border fraud, the FTC has focused law enforcement efforts on entities that facilitate scammers' ability to harm U.S. consumers. For example, the FTC entered into a settlement with Paddle, a UK payment processing company operating in the U.S. FTC alleged it was unlawfully providing services to tech support scammers operating in Cyprus. Further, to level the playing field for AI innovation, the FTC has sued companies that make false claims about the power of their artificial intelligence tools to turbocharge illegal money-making opportunities, claiming that with those tools, consumers can make significant money. Shifting gears, law enforcement education and outreach complement our law enforcement work. The FTC makes a wealth of materials available to the public. These include webinars, videos, blogs, data spotlights, all of which inform consumers about romance scams, investment scams, debt relief frauds, tech support schemes, to name but a few. Collaboration across government and among all stakeholders is equally critical. For example, in 2024, FTC and DOJ coordinated a government-wide education campaign to combat government in-person scams. This was done in connection with the World Elder Abuse and Awareness Day. We will do so again this year, adding many partners to to coordinate a campaign that will focus not only on government impersonation, but also business impersonation. And of course, in connection with the President's March 6 executive order, we welcome the opportunity to assist our federal colleagues in combating international cyber-enabled fraud. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Greisman. And now, Ms. Price.
Ranking Member Hassan, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the evolving threat of Chinese-linked scam centers. My remarks draw on the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's recent work, including 2 reports, travel to Southeast Asia, and recommendations for Congress to protect American savings and U.S. national interests. Chinese criminal networks operate industrial-scale scam centers that steal tens of billions of dollars annually. This is a massive criminal enterprise, which, as you have mentioned, rivals the global drug trade in scale and sophistication. For example, while estimates vary, scam centers in Burma, Cambodia, and Laos alone generated approximately $44 billion, about 40% of those countries' combined GDP. Many of these Chinese criminal syndicates have spread throughout Southeast Asia with at least implicit backing from elements of the Chinese government. In some cases, known criminal groups have invested in projects linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative alongside China's state-owned enterprises. We have also seen criminal leaders who appear to have gotten a pass by promoting messaging and other activities aligned with Chinese Communist Party priorities. At the same time, Beijing has used the scam crisis to expand its regional influence. Under the guise of cracking down on scams, China has pressured countries to agree to a greater role for Chinese security forces and has had success in Laos, Cambodia, and even U.S. ally Thailand. This inside-out strategy gives China greater leverage over the internal security apparatus of other countries. Chinese security forces have also confiscated electronic devices with Americans' personal data from raids on scam compounds. Initially, many scams targeted Chinese citizens in so-called pig butchering scams, the Chinese translation for winning a victim's trust to ultimately convince them to hand over a large sum of money. To its credit, China has cracked down on these operations, but it has done so selectively, largely turning a blind eye to scam centers victimizing foreigners. As a result, the Chinese criminal syndicates have been incentivized to shift towards targeting Americans in, quote, foreign butchering scams. To illustrate this point, in 2024, losses from online scams in China declined by about 30%, while losses in the United States increased by roughly 40%. Americans are now among the top targets of China-linked scam centers, with at least $10 billion lost to online scams in 2024 alone. The problem has also been evolving rapidly. As has been mentioned, scam center operations are now being turbocharged by artificial intelligence. AI allows criminals to create more convincing personas, tailor content, and operate across languages, all at scale. At the same time, cryptocurrency is increasingly used both to defraud victims and to launder illicit proceeds. Scam centers are also spreading beyond Southeast Asia, including to the Pacific Islands and parts of Africa. Congress and the administration have taken initial steps to combat these scams, but the problem continues to grow and we need to do much more. The Commission has proposed 11 recommendations and considerations for Congress to help combat these threats. I would refer to the committee to my written testimony, which lists them in some detail. In conclusion, scam centers run by Chinese criminal organizations threaten both the financial well-being of Americans and broader U.S. national security. As long as these networks can earn higher profits with lower risk by targeting Americans, they will continue to do so. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and I will note all of you kept to your 5 minutes. It was, and yielded back time, so I appreciate that very much. I'm going to go ahead with my first set of questions. I anticipate that the chairman will get back, I will go vote, and we will keep doing this back and forth. And I expect other members to come back and forth as the voting schedule allows. So I'm going to start with a question to you, Ms. Siefert. I want, again, thanks for being here. You discussed in your opening statement the early results of the Scam Center strike force, and it underscores the importance of law enforcement coordination at the federal level. Now, state and local law enforcement, though, are often the first point of contact when victims report a scam. Yet, New Hampshire law enforcement officers we reached out to recently weren't even aware that the strike force exists. Everybody gets busy, communication can be hard, but the U.S.-China Commission has recommended that the strike force establish information sharing pipelines and training programs so that state and local agencies can serve as true partners in federal scam prevention. So, Ms. Siefert, will you commit to establishing those programs and improving outreach to state and local law enforcement?
Thank you, Senator. So I think just to level set with respect to the Scam Center Strike Force's mission, we take cases and look at them a little differently than state and locals might look at them because we're not coming to it from a victim reporting approach, right? So as a state prosecutor or a state investigator, you get a victim, they say they have this loss, and then you're going to investigate that down the line trying to find a defendant. We're turning that model on its head. So we're starting from the concept that the overseas industrial scam compounds are operating in an open and notorious fashion. We have, in our targeting, identified the ones that we determine through various means and sources to be the worst offenders, and by that I mean the highest level of volume directed at Americans. And once we start targeting that particular group, right, or that particular cell, we start looking at what are the scams that are being run out of that compound. Once we do that, what we then do is go back and we'll say, let's say we find a scam compound and it has 10 websites that they have run as part of their scam to collect cryptocurrency. We'll run that through the IC3 database, and then we'll pull in every victim that has reported that information.
But without, and I appreciate that, and that's a very helpful overview. But look, without coordination, here's what victims are looking for. I've talked to a bunch of them in my state. I've talked to a bunch of law enforcement. And in New Hampshire, the partnership with the Secret Service has been very helpful, right? But what we are looking for and what my constituents are looking for is who do I contact and how do I get my money back? And how will they know about my case? And that one of the things is we have lots of potential reporting locations. And I do think, despite what you just outlined, it would be very helpful that you really collaborate with state and local law enforcement on the ground, because as important as the work you're doing to go after the overall criminal organizations, we have to have coordination on the state and local level too. So I hope very much that we can talk some more about the best ways to do that. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Absolutely, and I will just note that we do work primarily with FBI through our elder fraud initiatives and through other initiatives where FBI has task force officers who are embedded with them. And so we do get some exposure to state and local. Our initiative in DC is very focused on the overseas defendant for a lot of reasons to deal with venue in the District of Columbia.
I understand that.
And so that's why we haven't had that pathway so far.
Well, let's continue to talk about that, because one of the great frustrations I hear on the ground is there are any number of places to report. Our state and locals are they're overburdened with obligations too, although they are developing some pretty significant expertise because of the range of the crimes against their citizens. But let's continue to focus on that moving forward. To Mr. Heeb and Ms. Greisman, according to the Government Accountability Office, 8 different federal agencies receive scam-related consumer complaints. So this goes to the point we were just talking about. Mr. Heeb, on the FBI TIPS website homepage alone, consumers have at least 3 options for reporting scams: a submission form for federal crimes, a link to the Internet Crime Complaint Center for cyber-enabled crime, and a link to the Treasury Department for tax scams. Ms. Greisman, the FTC also maintains a separate scam reporting portal at reportfraud.ftc.gov. Scam victims have repeatedly told my office about their confusion over where to report scams and how to get help. And witnesses on our next panel have raised this challenge as well. And Mr. Heeb, I will tell you, I looked at the webpage, and if you don't have a law degree and don't understand the difference between and I have a law degree, and I couldn't understand all of the definitions that I needed to in order to figure out which of those agencies to reach out to or report to. So it shouldn't be this complicated for our constituents. So Mr. Heeb and Ms. Greisman, will you commit to working with my office on ways to simplify the scam reporting process for all Americans? Mr. Heeb?
Senator, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It is confusing.
Yeah.
And I think we've made a concerted effort over the years to really put the Internet Crimes Complaint Center out there front and center. And really, that is the single, as far as the FBI is concerned, the repository for that information. We do communicate regularly with our partners to share information. So I think the public should understand that if they were to provide it to one entity, it's not lost with that one entity. We put a lot of effort and energy into sharing that information, but I agree with you.
Yeah, let's work on that. Ms. Greisman?
Thank you. Yes, of course, we commit to making it easier for consumers to report. I will put a selfish pitch in for Sentinel, though, because it receives data from, as I mentioned, more than 100 different data sources, including Better Business Bureaus, State Attorney's General Office, IC3, Postal Inspection, a lot of industry, and it is available directly to law enforcement at the state, federal, and local level.
Okay, well, we can continue to work on that. I will let you know that the bill that I have with Senator Scott from Florida would create one single national reporting portal where victims can report scams to the federal government and have those reports forwarded directly to the appropriate federal and state law enforcement entities. And we obviously want to work with you on that legislation to make sure that it meets the need. Make sense? Thanks. Mr. Heeb, an additional follow-up. As I shared in my opening, one of my constituents reported to many entities a scam that stole from his mother, yet he has struggled to get a response from federal law enforcement, which really is another example of the lack of clarity that many Americans face. Can you commit to working with my office and reaching out to this constituent this week?
Yes, we can, Senator.
Thank
If
you.
you send me that information, I
Sure.
will take care of that.
Great. Okay, question to Commissioner Price, Ms. Siefert, and Ms. Greisman. So first to Commissioner Price, there is widespread acknowledgement that AI enables international scam compounds to vastly increase the scale and effectiveness of their operations. I think you all have touched on that. And I'm exploring this issue through a bipartisan investigation. Aside from AI, though, there are other technologies from U.S. companies that international scammers use to perpetrate their scams, whether through internet services or phishing campaigns over text. How have scam compounds used tools and platforms from internet service providers, the telecommunications industry, and or other U.S. industries to target Americans?
I think that the key to them is that they are using everything and every way that they can use it, both through telecommunications, through social media, ads in social media. They're using every possible vehicle, and that's what we have to look to.
Okay. We may reach out to you for some more specific examples, but let me go to Ms. Siefert and Ms. Greisman. How are U.S. companies cooperating with the federal government on addressing scam compounds, assuming that there is some cooperation here? Is there information you're not getting from companies that would enhance your anti-scam efforts? And we'll start with you, Ms. Siefert, and then Ms. Greisman.
Thank you, Senator. We have made a lot of progress on working really collaboratively and in parallel with the investigations that companies are doing on their own. And that was part of U.S. Attorney Bureau's announcement about the strike force, was that she wanted to have that open cooperation. So we do have several companies who have openly said that they are cooperating with the strike force, including Google and Meta and TRM Labs. We have a lot of other ones that are maybe not as vocal about their openness of their cooperation. And then we have others that we're still working on. So I'd say it's a myriad of different responses, but ultimately each of these providers has, for the most part, not regulated in what they're doing. And so it's up to them to determine how much effort and energy to put behind these types of initiatives. But every single one of them is impacted by this. I
Right.
mean, every single tool that's worth using, the scammers want to use.
Right.
We have great technology here in the United States.
Yeah, Ms. Greisman?
We know from our Consumer Sentinel reports that social media is the #1 point of contact with the scammers. Phone is #2. As one example, we work very closely with U.S. Telecom's industry traceback group to identify phone scams that are coming in from abroad, hitting a gateway provider in the U.S., and to take action, whether through warning letters or law enforcement, to cut that access to the foreign networks.
Yeah, I would really like to follow up to think through if there are things you need from Congress. I mean, it's important. We've been reaching out to companies too as part of our investigation. Some have been responsive, some have not. But if there are things you need from Congress to help make sure that companies see this as part of their responsibility, we are happy to work on that with you. Why don't I ask one more question, and then I will go vote, and then I come back, I have more questions. But Ms. Greisman, the Government Accountability Office has recommended that federal agencies standardize data collection on scams and develop a government-wide definition of scams and a single estimate of total losses from scams. Without these measures, it's more difficult to understand the scope of the scam problem, to target resources, and coordinate effectively. However, FTC has not yet agreed to accept and act on GAO's recommendations to standardize data collection, scam definitions, and estimates of losses. Will you commit to working across the government to reach a standard definition of scams and produce unified estimates that will enhance prevention efforts?
Two things. We are working with GAO, and we have addressed some of their recommendations. We're very keenly interested in trying to maximize and make most efficient consumers' ability to report to the government and to make those reports as accessible and meaningful as possible in terms of quantifying what's needed. Different agencies have different jurisdictional limitations, have different statutory enforcement authorities, which make it challenging. But yes, we certainly commit to doing all that is possible.
Okay, and we will, again, follow up with you, find out what you've been, I'd love to see kind of your responses to those recommendations or understand what recommendations you think are relatively straightforward to implement, I won't say easy, and what recommendations we might need to, really untangle a little bit, I guess, is given cross-jurisdiction issues.
Happy to follow up, and there already is a written record to some degree.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Senator. Enjoy voting. And once again, I apologize for the chaos that is the modern Congress. I'm going to start with Ms. Siefert. And I'm going to sort of leap into the end of my series of questions I had and sort of work backwards. How do we build a model, a technology, a policy, so the money never leaves the individual's account? If you actually, having gotten most of your testimonies last night and gone through them, it's often how do we go capture the bad guys, try to recover what we can. It's the constant problem of it's out the door and we chase. And we've had discussions, everything from family agreements for those who are older, saying with the financial institution that if it's over $5,000, another family member needs to be touched to issue that, to some sort of warning methodology. How do we stop so it's no longer sort of this pay and chase model, but it never leaves the account model? I'm blessed. I have a very well-educated district. I have a wealthier district, and the number of scams are just heartbreaking because these folks are the targets. Ms. Siefert.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, my own parents, I've had to tell them to put down the phone and ask who is talking to them. And this is like a core issue in my career now. So very much understand what a challenge it is and how important it is to speak with your family members about this. I would just highlight three things that I think are core to what our initiative at the Scam Center Strike Force thinks is part of this campaign. So one is the education, which is exactly what you're talking about. A lot of what we have seen is various agencies in the government with their own mandates, of course, doing education, but not doing it comprehensively and filling in the gaps. And that's part of what we're trying to do as part of the Scam
And
Center Strike
forgive me, I
Force.
know this is heresy. I've grown very skeptical on the effectiveness of education, considering how manipulative, almost evil, the use of some of the new technology has become. I'm almost wondering if there's, and this is going to be an open question for all of you, is there a policy set, whether from our financial institutions, our brokerage accounts, the Bitcoin machine down at the corner, whatever, that I have crazy stories of the owner of that business trying to stop grandma from stuffing money into it, and grandma lies to him because she's so convinced.
I think a lot of the challenges that with older Americans, they're coming to technology more recently, and they haven't grown up with a mindset. So while it might be harder in terms of educating them now, we also have to be educating the people who are younger because we don't want them to become victims later. The idea that single person that you meet on the internet, you need to verify who that is, that it needs to be inculcated into the culture of the United States. We do not know who we are dealing with when we get a text message.
Okay.
We have to, that's a big part of education.
Okay. Ms. Goldberg,
If I might, I just,
Okay, please
two other
finish.
things I'd like to highlight. So we do not think that the Scam Center Strike Force or the Department of Justice more writ large is gonna, get our way out of this problem by whack-a-moling the different targets. A big part of this is getting private industry to take on this problem as well and to work with us and to have a laboring oar in the boat with us. And that means that we need, for instance, providers to send warnings, for instance, to their customers when they detect that their customers are engaging in activity. There are things that other jurisdictions are doing, like they have, Singapore, I think, is a leader here, where they have an app, for instance, that the government puts out that describes that people can check as to what are scam websites or scam wallets, things of that nature. There are more sort of cutting edge things that you can do when the providers are willing to work with the government and really put into the technology more safety mechanisms.
well, okay, on that, Ren, how many of us have one of these that now when you get certain calls or certain texts, it pops up and says likely scam? Or,
That's a start. That's a start.
Well-
But the next step is to not even allow that phone call to come through, right? I think the likely scam still,
but that might require Congress, and you may actually have to deal with, we actually set up a thing because I had a father, my father has been scammed multiple times. We actually went and put a thing where there's a $5,000, he can't do something over that without a family member.
yep.
And it turns out the bank he uses actually did offer that service, just no one had ever asked.
And banks are doing a lot on the front lines here, but again, what you did with your family is something that not all families are talking about. Not all families with the older folks who are the targets of these scams have had that conversation already.
Okay.
And that's also a key part of public education. We just can't go for the older folks. We have to also get people around the Thanksgiving dinner table to be talking about this. We need the younger folks, the grandchildren and the children to also be saying, Grandma, who are you talking to on your phone?
All right, let's do a speed date. Mr. Goldberg, considering my skepticism on education, what technology is available that we could prevent the money from ever going out the door at the beginning?
I think this has to be looked at through two different vectors, the communication vector and the payment vector, right? So we have to work with private industry, and private industry needs to step up to identify the ways that victims are being contacted, initially through phone calls, through texts, through emails, through social media, and they have to improve the ability of their own platforms to prevent the fraudsters from reaching the victims in the first place. We in law enforcement are always going to be reactive to a scam that's already in progress, but we can provide them intelligence on what we're seeing, and they have to use their own intelligence, which they are doing a lot better at doing now, but they need to continue to improve their systems to prevent victims from being reached in the first place. Secondly, the payment vector. Once a victim is contacted and is compromised and wants to send their funds, those payment systems have to be ready to deal with that and prevent that payment from going elsewhere, whether it's a crypto ATM, whether it's a traditional bank account where the money's being housed, whether it's a crypto firm, whether it's crypto analytics platforms. They all need to be in the mix to stop that payment from flowing forward. Law enforcement, again, is going to be reactive, but we have to be communicating back and forth as we are doing now to make sure that they are seeing what we are seeing. They are seeing how the money is flowing to the fraudsters and how victims are being contacted so that their systems can be updated, again, so that the victim never receives that communication in the first place.
Okay, Mr. Heeb.
Mr. Chairman, we've had a lot of luck with the Internet Crimes Complaint Center just executing the financial fraud kill chain. That, of course, is dependent on someone calling, whether it's the victim, him or herself, or a family member. But I think to your point earlier, Senator, we need to educate family members as well, the younger generation, because you're right about the education component for the elderly generation now. They don't necessarily retain the information. And the reality is, these scammers are so good at what they do. I mean, some of the most sophisticated people, as you pointed out, the educated folks in your district. I mean, we've had former FBI directors that have fallen victim to schemes like this. I mean, career law enforcement officers have fallen victim.
But in some ways, you're making my argument that I know we'd like our education models. I'm hunting for a technology model.
And I think that's where, at least now, what we're dealing with the kill chain and the relationship with the financial institutions where they can stop the payment. Again, it is pay and chase at this point, and definitely take it back to give some consideration to technology to stop it.
Okay, Ms. Greisman.
First of all, I'd love the opportunity to disabuse you of your skepticism of the benefits of consumer ed. It really does work.
But it does work, but we spend how much time on it and how much fraud still takes place?
It needs compliments, there's no question.
So we need to just do more of the same thing.
We need to do more things more innovatively. So the example you gave with the phone is a great one. Years ago, the FTC held a series of challenges under the America Competes Act precisely to spur industry to develop technological solutions, call blocking solutions, so that maybe the call will get through, but it'll say spam alert, or it'll say give some sort of warning. We recently held a similar challenge to industry to develop technologies that would identify whether something is a voice-cloned telephone call.
You see, those are technology solutions. How do I make, as the kill chain word, which it's an interesting one, how do we help that, saying it never contacts my phone? We give permission and it never hits us.
That's a different approach to using to how you use the technology. The technology probably is there to totally block a call. There are other factors that are taken into account. I mean, there are working groups. For example, the FTC under the Stop Senior Scams Act formed a series of committees, one of which was to look at technological solutions that would minimize the impact of fraud targeting older adults. There are various working groups trying to create better information sharing among industry sectors.
Could you help me, if you can just either give me the link, because I want to read whatever they've written. Look, this is a plague on our society. You guys are doing amazing work. We need to get this down to zero. That always has to be the goal.
Happy to share with you what we've done.
That report would help. Ms. Price.
The commission has made several suggestions along these lines, several of which were alluded to already. But one is requiring telecommunication carriers and social media platforms to implement stronger verification and detection measures. So for example, existing anti-spoofing frameworks, there's one called the Stir-Shaken framework, which requires carriers to identify and verify caller ID information and that it's from a legitimate caller. But we don't know that it works for foreign phone calls and things coming from overseas. So that's one place where we could start. Another that hasn't been mentioned yet is greater cooperation with the financial intermediaries to detect and stop scams. especially in cryptocurrency when things start to move between individuals and their scammers. So there are several places where we've made suggestions in addition to what's already been mentioned.
Okay. All right, David?
Thank you, Chair Schweikert. I appreciate this particular hearing. I actually started my career at the Securities and Exchange Commission right after the Enron and WorldCom accounting scandals. In 2008, I was actually a staffer here at the Joint Economic Committee, so this is a bit of a homecoming, but of course that was the time of the '08 financial crisis. And those particular scandals, much like the rise in fraud that we're seeing today, targeted vulnerable communities, individuals that were not particularly sophisticated, whether these are seniors, whether these are folks that maybe are not used to sophisticated financial transactions, marginalized communities. And that is always the modus operandi. And I just want to share briefly a story about someone that I know in my church who came to me a few years ago. She knew that I'd done some work in banking, and she asked me for some help in unlocking her funds. She said that the FDIC and Federal Reserve had put a hold on her bank account, and I looked into it. She sent me an email that she'd received, and it was from an account that was something like Federal Reserve 01@gmail.com. Of course, I immediately freaked out, and as we were unwinding this and learned the story, apparently like a year prior to that, she had been told by her bank, someone she thought was at her bank, that her bank had been hacked, that she needed to take security precautions. You all are nodding because this is probably a very familiar story. It was new to me, but the end-all, be-all of it was that she allowed them to install software on her computer. She actually went and withdrew tens of thousands of dollars in cash at a time to give to couriers that would come to her house to pick up these funds. She, at the same time, was the target of another scam. And I'm not sure if it's the same people or different people, but I guess I should add, her husband had died prior to this. She's not sophisticated. Her husband had handled all the financial aspects of their relationship, so completely unsophisticated. She fell in love with someone she met online. Unclear how she was introduced to this person, but she'd never met this person. Was convinced by him to send money to a bank account to help buy a house. By the time I'd gotten involved, she had basically given away all her money. The only thing she had left was her house, and of course these scumbags were trying to get her to sell the house, give the rest of that money to purchase a home in Australia to move in with this person who, of course, probably didn't exist. And unfortunately, that is one of many, many sad stories that I've heard over the years, and I'm sure you've heard thousands of these. And these are getting increasingly complex. We heard you all talk about the rise of AI, just how sophisticated a lot of these fraudsters are. And when I talked, I just actually had a local law enforcement roundtable this past weekend. And this is a top concern, is senior scams, the rise of sophisticated people from around the world targeting people in Orange County, California, where I represent. And one of the key things that was emphasized over and over was the need to have more interagency cooperation, but also more cooperation between local, state, county, and federal authorities, and trying to make that work in practice was difficult. And I'll just add, and I know you can't comment on this, I believe that events over the last 15 months have also made this very, very challenging. The massive cuts to CFPB, to DOJ, and key segments of that, I know have made things challenging. I hear from my constituents all the time. I was shocked to see Margaret Ryan step down as the director of SEC enforcement last week, claiming that she was being barred or deterred from investigating associates of Donald Trump, whether it's his family or friends. To see that I think at this point 70 individuals who are donors to Donald Trump in various forms have been pardoned for financial crimes. And all of this, I think, complicates what you all are trying to do. But I guess my question for you all, and maybe I will start with you, Mr. Goldberg, is just on the theme of interagency cooperation, what concrete steps do you think we should be trying to implement here in Congress to help facilitate? Because these fraudsters operate, they don't care where their jurisdictions are, but it's very challenging oftentimes, whether it's local police or the FBI, to kind of figure out how to make things work.
Thanks for your question. So the federal government is working across all agencies in an unprecedented way to face the threat that you've described. We hear the heartbreaking stories every day, and we are incredibly devoted to addressing them in as comprehensive of a manner as possible. The executive order that was issued about 2 weeks ago requires the federal government to work together in an unprecedented way to use the Treasury Department, the State Department, the Department of Justice, and all agencies at its disposal to address cyber and cyber-related, cyber-enabled fraud writ large. Through the strike force from the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, working with the Criminal Division, FBI, Secret Service, working across various industries, working with the Commerce Department, the Treasury Department, the State Department. Again, we are working together in a way that we have never done before. So I think I bring good news to you that the effort is widespread and all tools that could be considered are being considered to address this growing problem.
Let me I'll just do one follow-up here. Mr. Heeb, particularly with respect to local law enforcement, a lot of local police local police departments don't always have the resources to be able to address these. Sometimes they don't know who to call at the FBI. What steps do you think should be taken to help facilitate that coordination between federal, state, and local, not just DC, but cities like Irvine and Newport Beach that I represent?
Sure, Congressman. We have an Office of Partner Engagement in the FBI, and the primary mission of that office is to train our state, local partners, tribal, territorial partners as well. And this is an area where, as Ranking Member Hassan pointed out, the state and local detectives, police officers, they're often the first ones that respond to these situations. When somebody loses their retirement savings or transfers what's left of their bank account out the door, it's the state and local law enforcement officers that are there in a very challenging situation. And nobody would expect that most departments would be able to conduct an investigation of this scale. So we've undertaken efforts in the FBI to get out and at least bring awareness to our partners about this threat. In fact, we have a local detective who's actually based out of St. Louis, Missouri, who has just really interested in this area, kind of a cryptocurrency expert, but he's well received by other state and local law enforcement officers out there. In fact, he's coming to headquarters to work with us to integrate into the National Coordination Center of the Homeland Security Task Force to kind of bring this component in to deal with some of those issues, sir.
Thank you. I yield back. Thanks, Chair Schweiker.
Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of wanted to follow up with some of the questions that, we're dealing with this issue a lot. I had recently constituents issue that the elderly mother was defrauded hundreds of thousands of dollars in some three-star general abroad was kidnapped, and she was sending money to him, and his son just realized recently that's happened to her. I had a credit union came to me and they said they stop a lot of situations like that. They had the customer came and wanted to withdraw $50,000 to pay some tax on some win. She got it, and she almost was going to close account. They convinced her that it's defrauding, and actually asked, was it a senior person? No, they said person was in early 50s, so it's not just elderly people, and as the fraud is getting sophisticated, I had someone with identity fraud in my district, and they pretty much wiped out all her assets, and it was really difficult. And as you know, local law enforcement cannot deal with that, and a lot of time it's not even happen in the country. Attorney General couldn't do anything about it. They really don't have. And in some of these issues, when they came to FBI, you guys be busy in a lot of stuff too, so it's no one really done anything. So we really need to think about it. A few years ago, I think early when I started in Congress, we had the bipartisan bills we passed in 21 to set up elderly justice initiative and DOJ like on a permanent basis. But I don't think it's just elderly. This fraud is getting so sophisticated. So my question to you is even these cases, a lot of time my constituents come to us. We try to connect to agencies, and we try to work with police, nothing really happening. And I know it's complicated, but we have to start dealing with that. So I wanted to go to Mr. Goldberg, maybe Mr. Heeb from you. I want to get some ideas. We don't even know where to go to help them. No one can help them. And some of these people are devastated. Their lives are getting destroyed, and these fraudsters that get really, really good. So I wanted to see maybe we need to think about it. How do we deal with that more effectively? And maybe Congress need to establish within our agencies more dedicated units and more dedicated procedures, and for us even to help with that so it can be coordinated and actually something needs to happen, and even prosecuting that would be very, very tough. So maybe Mr. Goldberg, you can suggest some things.
Yes, so there are thousands of complaints that come into the FBI every day, as well as to the Federal Trade Commission, that relate to these kinds of stories. The crucial, I think, communication, the messages to constituents when they contact you is, first of all, report. make sure you report to law enforcement, to IC3 or Consumer Sentinel. All of, as was discussed earlier in the testimony, these reports are sorts of collaboration between agencies, and we track them all. We track the types of schemes that are affecting victims the most for purposes of letting industry know, so that we know what we should be devoting our resources to. And then when we identify the largest schemes out there, those complaint repositories serve as a mechanism to identify victims that we use to serve as testifiers in our cases. So that is crucial that those individuals report for both education for us, for education for the public, and to serve our investigations. It's also crucial to use the resources out there by FTC, by AARP and others, education resources that are available online that individuals can review to make sure that they don't fall victim.
We reached out to FTC, nothing was done, because I understand you get overwhelmed. You know, you have a lot of stuff, but nothing was done in some of these cases. It's just nothing, and I don't, you know, maybe it's a lot of complicated, so I don't know. You know, maybe I can hear from FBI and FTC also. If there is something, maybe we need to think that we're more dedicated, because it's going to get so sophisticated. And unfortunately, a lot more people get entrapped, and not just seniors. So maybe Mr. Heeb, you can follow up too. And I think we have Ms. Greisman, right, from Greisman from FTC.
Sure. We receive about 3,000 complaints per day now in
Yeah.
IC3. There's a lot of analysis that takes place with that. And I pointed out Operation Level Up earlier in my testimony here today. And so far, because people have actually reached out and reported things, and despite the fact that they may not have received instant feedback, and certainly that, you know, not every report we receive is going to turn into an investigation, as you pointed out, but it's very important to us for all the things that Mr. Goldberg mentioned, the trends, things of that nature. But tying it back to this Operation Level Up, it's because of those reports and the information we received from those victims that we were able to go back out after seizing phones from these scam compounds, getting information off of the devices in those compounds, to go out and make contact with those victims who had reached out to us and let them know, sometimes for the very first time, that they were actually being a victim of a scam in some cases, much more than they had thought. So it is an important component.
I have a few minutes, Ms. Greisman, maybe you can.
Totally appreciate your concerns and constituents' concerns, but receiving 3 million consumer reports a year, it is simply not practicable, as Mr. Heeb says, to do a one-on-one. What we do is provide responsive educational materials. Looking at Mr. Chairman.
Is there anything you would suggest that we need to maybe do better, because it's becoming a very widespread issue for a lot of people?
I'd have to think about it, but it really is resource intensive on a scale that just does not readily accommodate the receipt of thousands and thousands of reports on a daily basis. It is more the model of the Better Business Bureau that does one-on-one intervention on behalf of consumers, but of course they're dealing with a totally different type of fraud, different type of problem.
Thank you. I was just playing. Apparently, the iOS update allows me to send unknown callers straight to voicemail and those things. Look, you and I are going to keep talking because, as you said, 3 million. We're going.
3 million a year. That's fraud reports.
Yeah, we're going to have to move to a technology solution. Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Is it Greisman? Greisman. So, you talked about collaborating with private industry. How willing is private industry or the businesses to work with you? Any holding back? Are they good partners in this?
It can be uneven. It can be challenging. I mean, certainly when there is pressure from Congress, when there's pressure from the public, as was the case with the scourge of robocalls. I mean, your constituents were very, very noisy and very vocal, and that is, I think, a good example of where we were able to work cooperatively, a little bit more cajoling perhaps than happy faces, but to get to a good result where technological solutions were developed. I mean, this is part of what we've done through the Stop Senior Scams Act work. You know, a committee specifically focused jointly with government representatives, consumer advocates, and industry to look at technological solutions to do better on the robocall front, to try to get out ahead of the curve, as I think we've been doing on voice cloning technologies. which offer wonderful, innovative, beneficial uses, but also terrible fraud uses.
Thank you. Ms. Price, you're our China expert here. Is the China's support, whether implicit or explicit, for the scam centers in the other countries, the Burma, the Cambodias, is this part of their grand strategy to weaken us? And why have they used that to put their law enforcement in those countries if those law enforcement are shutting down the scam centers?
What we found is they're implicit in allowing all of this to go on. In terms of putting their security in, they do it ostensibly to help put an end to the scam centers, but it allows them to get a serious foothold in these countries in their region. So it's part of their bigger geopolitical strategy along these lines. They're looking the other way on certain scams that might be directed at foreigners. That is just possibly capacity, possibly part of a bigger geopolitical effort. It's unclear.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Siefert? Siefert?
Yes, Siefert.
Is it the EI and the EI?
Thank you.
It depends. You wrote in your testimony, I'm sure you've written the oral part, which I missed, that you'd be much better off if you could use the human trafficking laws and also that the asset seizure laws, but can't because of U.S. law right now. Is anyone in Congress leading to fix those?
For those specific gaps, those are ones that our Office of Legislative Affairs is happy to work with any members on. I think those are things that are really, right now, things that the Scam Center Strike Force immediately could use to change the trajectory. So with respect to the seizure laws, if we discover a website that is scamming someone, we can't just go seize it. We have to prove that the website is also involved in money laundering. When we're talking about cryptocurrency and very sophisticated money laundering, that takes my agents a lot more time to actually build that out into a warrant. But if all I had to prove was that it was a mechanism of fraud, we could take that website down with a seizure much more quickly.
Great. Gives us something to work on here.
I like to give you homework.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Heeb, on the cryptocurrency, how much more difficult, more complicated is it with cryptocurrency jumping back, say, 10 years or 5 years ago when it was not as big a factor?
Congressman, it happens so rapidly now. It shaves so much time off of transactions that in law enforcement, we have to move much quicker to stop it. But transactions are down to seconds now. What used to take hours or days for money to leave the country, now it's out much, much faster.
Does that suggest anything different in terms of cryptocurrency regulation for us? You know, at the various financial levels, you know, Treasury Department, the Fed, et cetera.
I would defer to my colleague, Ms. Siefert, on that because she's been dealing with that regularly.
I think what we have seen is that whereas banks oftentimes have a built-in ability to pause a transaction for a few days based on the laws that exist, cryptocurrency exchanges don't have that, right? Like it's someone's money and they're moving the money and there's no protection for them to do a freeze. So they're really doing it at their own risk, right, of their customer then coming at them or suing them. I think that is something, you know, it's far be it from me to advise Congress on how it should regulate, but just in terms of what the tools cryptocurrency exchanges have, they have less tools than banks have because of the regulations that exist now.
Yeah, thank you. I just think if I want to move $25,000 of Fidelity, I got to check back 2 or 3 days in a row to see whether this actually showed up. There's a lot of steps in between, including 2 or 3 emails and phone calls, making sure that's what I wanted to do. Great, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much for our witnesses for being here today. This is such an important topic, and I think probably all of us on the dais, including everybody in the room here, and I welcome so many members from our senior organizations. I see so many here from the AARP. I know you have a witness in the next panel. Thank you for being here and engaging in these discussions. I think everybody across the nation has been shocked by the amount of fraud we're uncovering, and in some respects, as we see it flash across all of our TV screens at night, we're like, how did no one catch this? How did no one go after this? This is insane that we have allowed so much of taxpayers' hard-earned money to go straight to bad actors and criminals. I think it erodes the trust that the American people have in their government and have in when they faithfully give over their hard-earned money for us to be good stewards of that. And so I am so glad that we are shining a light on this issue. And it is a challenge because of the evolution of technology and how quick technology has become a tool for criminals. And, you know, I was just talking to someone yesterday that says, you know, if you had someone go into a bank and demand money, they'd probably get like $3,500, and the next thing you know, there'd be armed police and investigators galore, and FBI would be all over it, and it would be, you know, front page news. But in a second, somebody's life savings can be taken from them, sometimes from a foreign national, using technology, and we don't have the resources to keep pace with it. We just don't. As Attorney General in Florida, I realized this very quickly, that just as we were screaming as parents, I still have a kid in school, and we were screaming that stranger danger, don't get into the van, don't go with a stranger, doesn't work anymore because people are getting to your kids in their bedrooms through their computers. Same goes for economic crimes and fraud against our seniors and others, because you now have foreign nationals in other countries stealing life savings. You have people here in this country using technology in ways that are so easy to trick. I'll guarantee you, everybody in this room has been fooled at one time or another on one of these scams. So it crosses all economic barriers, all state lines. It is pervasive. And if you look at the numbers, we're not doing very well at keeping pace with it. So what I did in Florida, not only after developing a senior protection team that brought together various agencies, we created the first in the nation statewide cyber fraud team, which we trained our prosecutors, we trained our investigators, the statewide, on how do you go after somebody that scammed somebody of their life savings online? How would you even seize those assets that are in some ether world? Who would you even call if the foreign national is doing this from another country? And we learned quickly that once we had a synergy in place, and expert investigators and prosecutors in place, it amplified all of our cases. And we were able to see what may seem small, what the feds might not have even touched because it seemed small. Once we realized it was not just one senior, it was hundreds of seniors. Oh, all of a sudden the feds may touch that, but that never would have even been looked at because we don't have the resources, the manpower in place on the enforcement side to keep pace with the evolution of technology. And so, Mr. Heeb, I wanted to talk to you today about, you know, in our last meeting, I think in December, I said, we need a fraud czar. This is so big, and it's not just healthcare. It's all these grant programs. It's so many areas, all kinds of fraud against seniors. We need a fraud czar. Well, thankfully, we just confirmed Colin McDonald as Assistant Attorney General for DOJ's National Fraud Enforcement Division. I'm so glad we now have a person focused on this. But we can't keep pace. Just last week, we indicted a foreign national for defrauding Medicare Advantage plans in California for over $90 million. $90 million. That's just one case. So I want to ask you, how can we amplify? So when we did that in Florida, it was the first of its kind. And we tried to work with the feds, but we didn't even have the right statutes in place to be able to get information we needed overseas. We were trying to use a patchwork of existing federal laws. How could we empower other states to come up with similar teams? And who would be the best people in the FBI or another federal agency that could coordinate and amplify those efforts?
It's a great question. And we've been undertaking those efforts recently using our partners in local government. I mentioned earlier that there's a local detective in St. Louis who's he's an FBI task force officer, and I think that's an important component of this as well, is utilizing those task forces in each of our field offices to advance this, to kind of set up a model. And I think the FBI is well positioned to do that through our financial crime squads throughout the country in each of the 56 field offices to bring folks together to that end. But as you pointed out, that's completely correct. once folks get together in a room and kind of take some of the mystery away of these investigations, things become a lot easier. And I think we need to capitalize on the relationship that exists in the field offices. There's so many folks since September 2001.
But an FBI task force officer like that could be, that's one officer generally in one agency, and that's the person that they go to for everything from that drug deal that just went down, that counterterrorism assignment. They need to go track somebody for days, right? So we're never going to touch this if we just rely on the one task force officer in the one agency. We need states on a statewide level to embrace the concept of this is a new day and age in crime. You have to learn these new technologies and embrace it to help your citizens, right?
Agreed.
And you would agree to help them.
And we would agree. And what I'm suggesting is that using the task force model to sort of train the trainer to get out and have our folks be the point of contact to train our state and local partners. Like I say, we've started that already, but we certainly need to do more in that area. But yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Keston.
Thank you all for being here. Ms. Siefert, maybe I'm just a child of the 80s, but I found myself chuckling when you were saying that, you know, the crypto firms don't have the tools that the banks have to slow down this movement. And I'd sit and think of that scene and Say Anything when John Cusack asks all the guys, like, if you know so much about ladies, what are you doing sitting here by yourself at a convenience store late at night? He says, choice, man, conscious choice. Why do the crypto firms not have the tools? Choice, man, conscious choice. They could build those tools. And, you know, I think if our goal was to design a system that was perfectly designed to launder money, transfer it out of the United States, get it out quickly where you can't trace it, anonymize it, run it, I couldn't do better than crypto. Like, I don't know how I would invent a better system to do that, which I guess is good because it means, Mr. Heeb, it ain't going to get worse, at least with the limits of my creativity. I think in many ways what Congress has done over the last term has made it worse because we've taken some of the high-touch, high-compliance agencies and moved crypto into them. And so we're going to be dealing with that for a while. FBI reports that there's been more than 333 million of crypto ATM scams. Just in 2025, that was a 33% increase, which means on any measure we're doing worse at this than we were doing last year. I'm not saying that to criticize anybody here, just the dynamic of where it's at. Ms. Greisman, I noticed on your website, it says, has Lois Greisman contacted you? I will never ask for money. I assume that's why?
Yes.
Has your name been used of people saying that people at the FTC need your money?
I think any number of people at the FTC's name has been used to that extent, and people across government. Imposter scams are the #1 scam they have reported to the FTC. That's been the case since 2020.
I know a number of you, Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Heeb, Ms. Siefert, have mentioned that you could work with us on better regulation, and I hope we can follow up because we're going to use up all the time if we talk about it right now. But we had Andrea Gacke, Director of FinCEN in Financial Services, and she essentially said that they need more tools and that we need to give them more tools, particularly when the actors who are pulling this money are based overseas, to make sure that they have the authorities that are there. Just for context, I think there's been some reporting that more than half of the GDP of Cambodia and Myanmar are these crypto scams that are coming through, and like we just need to make sure that you guys have got the tools, guys and gals, have the tools to do that. I want to come back to you, Ms. Greisman, on the questions because what causes them to send is one question. The trigger is more often something else on the internet, often on Facebook. These romance scams, there was a thing just in Chicago, they recovered $214 million in proceeds from a pump and dump scheme that was going on Facebook and getting people to go on WhatsApp and transfer money. And there was Reuters reporting recently that more than 10% of Meta's revenue in 2024 was from these fraudulent ads. They're doing nothing to shut it down. There were reports in the UK that they've been trying to enforce it, and Meta's doing nothing to shut this down, not putting up reasonable guardrails. And so, you know, there have been bipartisan calls for the FTC to step in and hold Meta to account. Has the FTC initiated any of those investigations to date?
Representative, I hope you'll understand, I can't speak to whether we may or may not be doing anything vis-à-vis any particular company. To your point of social media as initial point of contact for scammers, yes, that's what our data show. It is the #1 point of contact, and it has been for a couple of years. That's not surprising. That's where people are. On your second point, in terms of the method of payment, scammers prefer the method of payment that offers the greatest anonymity and the least likelihood of being traced or being caught in any way. So that's why you see particular methods of transfers. The #1 method of transfer that consumers report is bank transfers. #2 is crypto.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, when Eric Trump records a YouTube ad saying I can transfer $500 million overnight while drinking a glass of Chardonnay, that's a problem, not a solution.
Understood.
Well, look, I would appreciate and I understand that you can't discuss ongoing activity, but this is $16 billion in scams that are originating on Facebook. And the UK is publicly reporting that they are trying to go after them and seeing no change. And so I would hope that in this setting or some setting, you convey what you're doing. And in the same way it asked, everybody else here, if there are gaps in what you are able to do that Congress can fix, please let us know, because as I said at the start, this problem is getting worse.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yield
And
back.
to my House members, we're at about 10 minutes on the vote clock, so we get to start waddling over. Senator?
And Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I used to be a prosecutor, so care a lot about the work that so many of you do. Ms. Price, could you just start by talking about the role that foreign-based networks are playing in this global scam economy?
Thank you for the question. Again, as in the testimony, they are creating these huge scam centers. They traffic people in to work at these scam centers. They just sit there around the clock, targeting American citizens and people around the world, but targeting Americans using social media, using phone scams, using all different types of methods that they can do. It's run by Chinese syndicates in many of these cases, often with the implicit wink and nod from the Chinese government, who knows what's going on, who did do a job of shutting down many of them that targeted Chinese citizens. So that's some of the areas.
So what do you think we should do?
Well, we have many suggestions. We have over 11 suggestions that the commission made to Congress. Everything from an interagency task force on scam centers that would do much of what those sitting here are already doing, but on a bigger scale, and to make it more permanent. Bigger national awareness campaigns. A lot of what those sitting here on this panel are doing is wonderful, but we need to go so much bigger. And cooperation with technology companies, new AI tools to find some of this.
Got it.
We go
I'll look
on
at
and
it.
on.
Thank you, Ms. Greisman. Can the FTC use AI tools itself to combat the fraud?
We do. We use AI tools to assist us in collecting consumer reports and also in analyzing them.
Do you think you need more resources to combat this fraud?
I think we're working very effectively within the resources that we have. If Congress is interested in exploring additional resources, I'm sure we'd be happy to work with you.
Mr. Heeb, we've had a number of scams in my state against soldiers. They're serving overseas, and actually one of my former employees, her husband got a call that it was his son. They'd scraped his voice when they didn't know where he was deployed, but they knew it wasn't where the person said he was deployed, or they thought he wasn't there, and they tried to get money. So and he figured it out, but I'm not sure their grandma would have figured it out. So talk about those types of scams.
Senator, the use of AI has shaved years and years off what it would take to advance these schemes. And what we used to tell people about when you receive an email, look for certain signs, like it's grammatically incorrect, or there's misuse of the language or sentence structure or something, it doesn't apply anymore. These communications are written better than many Americans that natively speak the language can write. So it has become a major challenge for us, a major obstacle.
Well, Senator Capito and I just introduced a bill on this, and I'm sure the leaders up here have similar bills, but to me, we have to put a major legislation through on AI in general. It can be unleashed, and I think it was David Brooks who wrote, "Is it going to bring us to heaven or hell?" And we want us to bring it to heaven, but that's only if we are willing to take some of this stuff on and have some kind of tools in place. The other thing about it, which I heard you reference, was local FBI agents and the like. Like in our state, as you probably heard, our U.S. Attorney's Office was just hollowed down. We're dealing with major and righteous fraud investigation and prosecutions. And then I'm afraid if we're down on resources, which why I asked Ms. Greisman, we lost half the staff there over a Justice Department asking them to investigate Renee Good's wife. And we lost our most seasoned prosecutors, all of them, who were fantastic, and they're all gone. And so it's just hard for me to believe that in this kind of environment, if we don't stop politicizing some of this, that we're not going to have the resources that we need and the people that we need to take on these incredibly complex cases. So do you want to just talk, you don't have to talk about Minnesota, but just about the kind of resources that we're going to need?
Yes, Senator, we've seen it with our own agents. Just taking, for example, a healthcare fraud squad, we have either an agent, team of agents, or an entire squad of agents in every field office that investigates healthcare fraud. And we've seen in some instances where one of those two agents in an office, or even one of the agents on a squad, departs, and it changes the whole dynamic of that field office's ability to effectively investigate a particular violation. And that's true with prosecutors too. And we've always said, like, we could train our agents to be the very best at investigating fraud, but if you do not have prosecutors that are able to prosecute it, it's really not helpful. So it really is a challenge to get people trained up. And we, at least on the investigative side in the FBI, put a lot of resources into training our agents so that they can effectively address the threat. But there's so much of it throughout the country that it's very difficult. It is a pay and chase model.
Yeah.
And could we fix it? Yes, but there's a cost that comes with fixing it as well in terms of the delivery, the speed of delivery of service. But all that said, it is a challenge, Senator, to make sure that you have a workforce that's equipped.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I have a few more questions, and if folks come in who haven't asked during that time, we'll let them ask a couple too. But I thank you all for being such good stalwarts, because this is a long time to be entertaining questions. Ms. Siefert, I wanted to follow up on the last answer you gave, and that was several rounds ago. So we were talking about the levels of cooperation that you did and didn't receive, perhaps from various companies. And you said you've received varying levels of cooperation from companies. What are some specific examples of the information that would be helpful for you that you're not getting?
So the way that we are working with companies is oftentimes companies have an internal trust and security team, and they do their own investigations. And what we find to be effective is where they provide that information to us, their investigation and the results, and then likewise we can provide disclosures to them. So for instance, when I'm getting to the end of a case, I might have 150 email identifiers or account identifiers across many different social media platforms and ISP platforms. And what we can do is we can provide that information back to the provider, and we can say, look, we've tied all of these accounts back to the criminal syndicate that is running this compound. Can you look on your network and see what you see? Because they see a myriad of things that's so far beyond what we can see. And through that collaboration and discussion, they can also say, oh, well, what we're seeing is when we look at the network behind it, we're seeing this over here and that over there, and we're seeing this in this other country. And then we can go to that other country based on that information and talk to them about what they're seeing. So we're really using that conversation as a way to collaborate both with them and then with the other entities that and geographically are working on this problem. We have a really strong connection, of course, with our Five Eyes partners, but also with other countries in the region that are actively working on this as well.
Right, so that's an example of some of the information sharing that's been helpful. Are there industries that seem more reluctant than others to cooperate? And I'm not talking about company names here, I'm just talking about categories of industry.
I think that when we're talking about the industries and they're wanting to cooperate, they all have just a different view, right? And so sometimes how that view sort of intersects with what we're trying to do on the Scam Center Strike Force, right? Which is to make the biggest cases we can against the biggest groups of defendants and the networks of defendants. They might not totally fit into our model. But to give an example of one thing that is positive, we have a lot of banks that say, we want to help, but they don't really understand how to help.
Right.
So what Counsel Goldberg and I have been doing is meeting and helping with other groups to create like a round table where the banks can come in and say, this is what we're seeing. And we're learning from that as well. So banks oftentimes actually are, more even than state and locals, the first things people call when they're defrauded, right? And so they might get a victim report that never comes over to the feds. If it goes to the locals, we might get it, but we won't get it from the bank. So that's a helpful piece of information about how we can integrate. So I think we're just at various points of progress with those industries, and part of it is also how to bring them into the types of cases that we're doing.
Well, that was a very sensitive and diplomatic response to my question, which I appreciate. Look, I think what I'd like to do, and if more comfortable doing it offline, is help figure out where we need to make progress. There are other countries that are really blazing the trail with working with the private sector in pretty effective ways. And one of the things I want to figure out is how we set up that model. Companies don't like to share proprietary information with other companies who might be their competitors. There are ways we've dealt with this with data breach and other financial breach settings, so there are things we can do, but let's follow up on that if you're agreeable, okay?
Happy to do so.
Mr. Heeb, and I'm going to ask a question of Mr. Heeb, Mr. Goldberg, and Commissioner Price. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Heeb. A recent FBI briefing describes scam compounds in Southeast Asia as sophisticated, well-resourced criminal enterprises that operate on an industrial scale, and you guys have all really touched on that. What additional efforts are needed in the region to ensure that the FBI and its partners target the kingpins of transnational criminal organizations and not just low-level operatives? And are there barriers that prevent you from pursuing those efforts?
Thank you. The biggest barrier is the fact that in those situations, we are guests in another country. So much of our effectiveness depends upon the relationships with law enforcement in the host country. And where we have those good relationships, like Thailand, India, for example, we've had great success with going in, and to your question about getting to the higher levels of those operations, and not just the folks, many of whom are victims of human trafficking. That's where we've been able to derive intelligence to lead us to those, whether it's through interviews of those individuals, downloading information from the electronics devices that were seized. We are making great headway, but it's really limited in certain countries by perhaps a lack of relationships. And that's where we are doing everything we can through our legal attaché offices to solidify those contacts and connections.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Goldberg, many international scam compounds are run by Chinese organized crime networks. So what's the status of the Chinese government's cooperation with the U.S. government to identify and shut down these compounds?
Well, actually, I would turn to Mr. Heeb for some input on that question, because I think he may have a bit more to say with respect to Chinese organized crime and the work that's being done with the Chinese government. But we are working with all governments that we're able to in order to try and address this problem. With respect to the industrial scale of these operations. We are trying to identify the command and control of these scam compounds and target them. That is one of the principal purposes of the strike force, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office strike force that we're working on in the criminal division, to identify that command and control, to disrupt, and to prosecute those individuals. As Mr. Heeb described, oftentimes the lower level individuals are not individuals we are even interested in prosecuting because they've been trafficked in. So we are looking to use whatever we have to identify on the larger scale who is running the compounds themselves.
Okay, and Mr. Heeb, as to the Chinese government's cooperation, how's it going?
Well, the director did travel out there back in November to meet with he went to Beijing, met with their, make sure I got the title correct here, the vice minister of security there, just basically to open the lines of communication. It's very beginning stages. It's the first time since 2016, in my understanding, that the director of the FBI has traveled out to do that.
Okay.
And we realized that we need to make connection there to address the scam centers.
And there's been bipartisan effort over the last 8 years or so in Congress to work with the Chinese government, for instance, on the fentanyl precursors, varying levels of cooperation, but we got better cooperation from them over recent years, and part of that was law enforcement to law enforcement, part of that was congressional delegations, part of that was executive branch to executive branch. So I think it just needs to be all of us full court press here.
And grateful for your efforts there too, Senator. I think the director, and I didn't mention it because we're focused on the scam centers here, but the director, that was a main topic of his conversation there as well, was the precursor chemicals.
Yeah, no, critically important. Finally, Commissioner Price, on this question, and then I'll have one more for you guys, and we're close to being done. Commissioner Price, reports from the U.S.-China Commission have explained how activity at scam compounds often supports China's geopolitical goals. So how should the administration work with China to strengthen its cooperation on this issue? We've just talked about some of the individualized efforts, but what do you see as the biggest barriers to these efforts?
I think we need conversation. We need the diplomacy that goes with these conversations with the Chinese. So that's first and foremost. I know it's on the agenda in the coming months at the highest levels, and hopefully this will be on that stage. But also in terms of your previous question, our bilateral relationships with these countries are key. They're in the neighborhood. China is on their borders, and they feel very pulled, but they need a positive relationship with our country to get to work on other goals that they have and work better together with us. So it's all part and parcel.
Okay, thank you. So I have a final question for all of you. Some of what, you've touched on some of these things, but throughout this first panel, we've discussed ways to strengthen the federal response to address the growing danger of scams. And this is you can come up with one or two priorities or follow up with us later, but I'd like to give you each the opportunity to share your top one or two priorities for congressional action. Understanding you all work as well as you can with the resources you have, that goes without saying. But if it's more resources that would be the most helpful, let us know that too. So what is it your agencies need from Congress to further prevent scams, and/or what actions would you recommend that Congress take to strengthen the federal government's response? And I'll start with you, Mr. Goldberg, and we'll just go down the line.
So I would point, Senator, to a report that the White House issued last year on the working group on digital assets that had several gaps that it identified in the law that, if filled, would help prosecutors to make progress, specifically on such issues as seizing digital currency and other actions. That is a publicly filed report that identifies those gaps, and we'd be happy to follow up with you later to work with you to provide more information.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Heeb.
The biggest challenge that we're facing now, Senator, is just the sheer amount of data.
Yeah.
And I think, artificial intelligence is being used by our adversaries. They can go out to market and buy it off the shelf and use it. They can pay for subscriptions for it from $200,000 to $20,000 a month, whatever it may be. I think as the government, we've been a little bit slower to incorporate. I know FTC mentioned that they're using it, but that would be something for us that would be really helpful in triaging the complaints we're receiving. Because right now we're doing a lot of analysis and there's a lot of very skilled people doing it, but it is a manual component of going through the data
Okay.
and making the connections.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Ms. Siefert.
I won't repeat the gaps in the law that I mentioned earlier with Representative Beyer, but I think the two things that I would highlight that we haven't talked about today, Senator, are first, the executive order does ask the Department of Justice to look at the ability to do a victim fund here. That isn't something we've talked about at this hearing, but one of the challenges that we have at the U.S. Attorney's Office is that when we seize cryptocurrency, we typically can only associate between 20 and 30% of what we seize with the victim. And the current status of the law means that we have to very carefully trace each, penny of cryptocurrency back to the
Right.
victim. And I think that if there was a different way to make victims whole, besides just our offices going and seizing this money and then going through the remission process, which takes a lot of time
Right.
and is very labor intensive and is not going to make most victims whole, that would provide another avenue for victims to be able to be at least maybe even partially made whole, to get some of their funds back. But we can't prosecute our way out of every victim's loss. We just don't have the resources, and frankly, the money is moving too fast.
Right.
And I think that's my second point, which is the money in the cryptocurrency world is moving so fast, it's so sophisticated, the types of money laundering we're seeing are just light years ahead of traditional money laundering, and the network of the money launderers is, for the most part, separate from the network of the compound itself. So even if I can crack the code on who's leading the compound at sort of the regional level, that person is totally divorced from the money laundering network, and that's a whole separate case. So we're spending a lot of resources on both sides of the problem, but one of the challenges we have with cryptocurrency is just the speed with which the money is transferred through the system and getting exchanges to be able to slow down those processes, slow down those transactions so that we can come in and seize them so that they can come in and run quality control on them.
Thank you, Ms. Greisman.
Respectfully, I'd refer you to FTC Chairman Ferguson's February 27 letter to committee leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Price.
It's hard to pick from the 11 recommendations that we make, which is my top priority. But I would start with a bigger national public awareness campaign. There's so much good stuff going on, as was talked about by these panelists, but we have to go bigger, and Congress can play an important role doing that. I'm preaching to the choir. You are already doing this, but every member of Congress sends material out to constituents. Every member of Congress is out on the campaign trail or in town halls or talking to constituents every weekend. So much more needs to be done on a massive scale to talk about it, to make people aware. And the second thing would be an interagency task force on scam centers. We have the initial start with the scam center strike force, but we need bigger, we need codified, we need it to have specific ideas, what Congress wants to see happen, and we have to make sure it happens. A lot of these pieces of legislation, including a Senate bill you were a co-sponsor on, the Scam Compound Accountability and Mobilization Act, passed unanimously in December. We need to do more, get it passed in the House. We need to be doing more.
I appreciate that very much. I'll let you know that one of the things that local law enforcement in my state have started doing is when they have the personnel to do it, they're hanging out outside of Bitcoin machines too. And if they see, especially an older American approaching the Bitcoin machine, they're trying to have a conversation about, gee, why are you here today? Because so many people are, being directed by the scammers to transfer their money or change their money. And once it's gone, to your point. So we have a lot of work to do. I really learned a lot from all of you today. I appreciate everything you're doing in your service to our country. Thank you for that. And this will conclude this panel. We're going to then recess the committee hearing till the next panel. And again, appreciate all of you very much. Thank you for your work. non-technically, I'm supposed to say we're recessing to the call of the chair.
I'm sorry, it's just the nature of the body these days is the ability to sort of sit and ruminate and concentrate. But that's why that's why the staff is going to write us all big memos and make us read things. So I'm going to open up the second panel here and do some introductions. I'm going to not give an opening statement. We're going to just move right into questions, and then we'll wait for my ranking member, and then hopefully we can do some follow-ups on what we want to understand. But as you do your opening statements, which I'm sure are already all written, I will beg of you near the end to freelance on solutions. First panel, brilliant, wonderful, not enough solutions. We got to fix this. And I'm tired of having more bureaucratic talk. So, all right, we are open. First off, thank you for our panel, our witnesses coming and spending some time with us. Mr. Stuart Baker was the first Assistant Secretary of Policy at the Department of Homeland Security under George W. Bush. He is an expert on national security, electronic surveillance, and related technology issues. Mr. Steptoe, help me on the last.
Bagdoyan, Mr.
Bagdoyan, I was actually going to get that. Okay. Is the Director of the Forensic Audit and Investigation Services at the GAO. There, he focuses on forensic audits of major federal programs ranging from healthcare to disaster relief. Ms. Kate Griffin is the Director and Inclusive Financial of Inclusive Financial Systems at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. In this role, she led the launch of the National Task Force on Fraud and Scam Prevention. That sounds interesting. Ms. Kathleen Stroke is the Director of the Fraud Prevention Program at AARP, where she leads their education on financial security and fraud. Thank you for being here, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, I'm Stuart Baker, and I'm pleased to be talking to you and Representative Sparks. I've got nothing but solutions. I don't know that they're perfect solutions, but that's all I've got. I've spent a lot of time in government. I was at DHS, as you said. Before that, I was at NSA. I've done a number of commission reports. And one of the things that is different from me in terms of approach to government is I always thought we lacked sufficient confidence in the private sector to solve some of these problems. And I proposed long ago, probably 15 years ago, that what we should do is allow the victims of cybercrime to do more outside of their network, to catch the criminals and get back their stuff, that they were in a much better position than law enforcement to do that. And I got two responses to proposals like that. The first was from the people in government who said, you know, you should just leave this to the professionals. We know what we're doing, and we don't want a lot of people messing up the space. And then if you press them, they said, well, your solution is going to produce vigilante justice. That was the slogan that was used to discredit the idea of a broader involvement of the private sector. I'm struck by that because, in fact, although in these areas, in cyber crimes and cyber scams, we don't allow a lot of room for private enterprise to respond to these attacks, we've got a century of experience allowing private actors to take on responsibilities of law enforcement. We have private security guards in stores and for people who feel threatened. We've got opportunities for people to file lawsuits on behalf of the United States government if they think that money is being wasted. And they take the initiative in bringing that forward. We have bounty hunters who go looking for people who've jumped bail. And we have private investigators. All of them are using some government authority, but they're doing it because they're paid by somebody else to do it. And that has the value of dramatically expanding the number of people who are working on the good guys' side and bringing some innovation and creativity to the problem. I think that's true here, and I reference your bill on the letters of marque, which is designed, I think, to do exactly that, to say we ought to be able to designate some people that we have confidence in, give them some rules and some terms and conditions, and send them out to find the people who have engaged in these scams and get the money back. And while I listened a long time to all of the statements from the government today, I didn't hear a lot about money they got back, because I don't think they got a lot of money back. They're about big pictures and assembling databases and maybe taking down some kingpins. But getting the money back is not high on their list of things they can do, because I don't think they know how to do it. Why not let the private sector go out and start looking for this stuff? It's all, as we know, it's all in digital currency, and it's all hidden, as we heard somebody say. You know, even if we crack the scam center, we haven't got to the money yet. It's off somewhere in a separate network. So you want people who actually understand those networks to get in and start moving through those networks in an effort to find and seize those funds. The biggest blow to cyber scammers that we've seen from the government is they seized $15 billion of their funds. That was a great thing. We still don't know exactly how they did that, and that was long ago. That was money earned 5 years ago. But why not have more people out looking for those funds? So the government's not doing a great job, and it's hard to believe that the private sector would do worse. What's the risk of vigilante action? I think the answer to that is kind of buried in your bill, which is you can set terms and conditions. You can say you get a license and you don't because you've been responsible and you haven't. And so I would suggest that with one tweak, your bill is definitely worth a try, because it's not like something else is working. And the tweak I would suggest is we have to remember these funds were all taken from somebody, some victim, some innocent victim. And going out and seizing them is great. It hurts the bad guys. But we got to make sure that when we seize them, most of them go back to the victims.
Yes.
And so I would suggest the one thought is the incentive should be no more than 25 or 30% of what you seize from the bad guys. Last point. One of the things that, even if you can't persuade everybody in Congress to do this, you could at least, I think, persuade them that the rules on who gets a percentage of the seizure when they come to the government and they say, I found the money, you should seize it, here it is. Right now, if they're viewed as a whistleblower, they get 25 or 30%. They've been $250 million has been awarded to one whistleblower. But the Justice Department has a statutory bar that they can't give more than $250,000 to anybody, no matter how much money they help them bring in. If the Attorney General approves, they can go to $500,000. That's a very old and, I think, outdated limitation, and it's worth taking a close look at whether you can get rid of that.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Bagdoyan.
Thank you, Chairman Schweikert, Representative Sparts. I'm pleased to discuss today GAO's April 2025 report about scams targeting U.S. consumers, including older adults, and the federal response to counter them. The theme of this hearing, Modernizing the Federal Response, aligns with our report's findings and recommendations. A single example highlights the scope and scale of scams and their financial toll on consumers. A 2023 international police operation against online financial crime, including scams, yielded over 3,000 arrests and seizure of $300 million in assets across 34 different countries, including the U.S. Relatedly, in December 2025, by extrapolating complaint data FTC estimated U.S. consumers incurred $196 billion in financial losses through fraud, including scams, $82 billion of which, or 42%, was incurred by older adults. However, the full extent of financial losses is likely understated since consumer complaints are, in turn, underreported. Scammers move metaphorically at the speed of light, as some of the other panelists from the first panel mentioned, and with great sophistication. Frequently operating, as we heard, from foreign countries, scammers employ deception or manipulation enabled by state-of-the-art technology, including artificial intelligence, to achieve financial gain. In contrast, the federal response is reactive, fractured, and inadequate. This must change, and quickly. Our report noted specifically that given the scope, scale, and nature of scams and the risks that they pose to consumers, the federal response falls short on risk management fundamentals. Particularly, it lacks a proactive government-wide strategy and lead agency to organize counter-scam activities undertaking, again, as we heard in the first panel, by multiple agencies and target them at prioritized risks. A government-wide strategy would introduce risk management fundamentals to help ensure the federal response to scam risks is swift, integrated, and nimble. Importantly, there is no common definition of what constitutes a scam and no in-depth systematic assessment of scam risks and their financial implications. A common definition serves as the organizing principle of subsequently assessing and quantifying the risks posed by scams and crafting and implementing an effective government-wide strategy to counter them. Otherwise, there's no assurance that any revamped federal response will counter the right risks in the right priority and in the right manner. We made 16 recommendations to FBI, FTC, and CFPB, the federal agencies we deemed best positioned to lead the federal response. To date, these agencies' rejoinders to us are mixed. They agreed with some recommendations and disagreed with or took no position on others. For example, the FBI agreed to lead the government-wide strategy formulation and outlined initial steps to do so, which is great. Concerningly, it disagreed with other recommendations essential for an effective strategy, such as adopting a common definition for scams. In closing, scams, including those of foreign origin, pose immediate and evolving risks of harm to U.S. consumers. This requires an equally immediate, decisive, and comprehensive federal response. Accordingly, it's imperative for agencies to implement all our recommendations fully and expeditiously. The solution starts with a strategy. There's no way around this. Chairman Schweikert, Representative Sparts, Senator Hassan, this concludes my remarks. I welcome the committee's questions. Thank you.
Chairman Schweikert, Ranking Member Hassan, Ms. Sparts, thank you so much for inviting me here today. My name is Kate Griffin. I'm Director of Inclusive Finance at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. Our work is to ensure that our financial system delivers on a basic premise to the American people, the ability to build and preserve wealth. We work on scam prevention because, as you've heard about extensively this afternoon, as you know from your own constituents, there is a massive amount of household wealth that is flowing out of this country and into the hands of transnational criminal organizations. Over the last 18 months, we convened hundreds of experts from 80 institutions, public sector, private sector alike, as part of the National Task Force on Fraud and Scam Prevention. We focused our efforts on what it would take to mount a coordinated defense. My testimony today reflects the outcomes of the task force's work, which culminated in a paper titled United We Stand, a National Strategy to Prevent Scams. These online scams are first and foremost a business, a $200 billion a year business, as my colleague just pointed out, which makes them a Fortune 50 company. It's set up and run by sophisticated criminal networks, and the only way to defeat scams is by undermining that business model. We have to make it harder, riskier, and less profitable to prey on the American people and the online systems they rely on. so that at every step a scammer takes, American industry, empowered by policymakers, is making it harder to create accounts, to send messages, and to transfer funds. All of society, from Congress and the administration to the global private sector companies that participated in our task force and more, must take bold action to meet this challenge. As we've already heard today, there is exciting good news to report. There is progress being made. Last week at the UN Global Fraud Summit, there were a number of announcements being made. A few examples, a group of digital services companies announced a new set of industry accords that outline the actions they are taking on their digital platforms to identify and take down scammers, focusing on prevention, intelligence sharing, resilience, and also public awareness. We see the administration acting. We already talked a little bit today about the executive order that was issued on March 6th that elevates the issue of cybercrimes and predatory schemes to the level of a national priority. It directs key federal agencies to identify areas for improvement, and it directs the creation of a federal action plan to strengthen our government defenses against those criminals. All were key recommendations in our report. And we're excited to see Congress acting. Between hearings like this and the numerous bills that we've been discussing that are addressing pieces of the problem, we are encouraged by that leadership. But at this critical moment when there's so much momentum, we cannot let up the gas. There are 5 things that we think Congress could start doing today to further this work and to be an integrated part or a partner with the rest of the ecosystem. First is to form a plan that helps to prioritize legislative reforms. We're going to talk about what a whole of ecosystem solution must be, and that means that your work in Congress has to coordinate interventions across your own committee silos. A cross-committee whole of Congress process could review the needs and the shortfalls and create a prioritized set of reforms to implement alongside the administrative branch process. That's one. There are 4 other specific anti-scam goals that you could take on. First is to enhance law enforcement's powers to seize or achieve the forfeiture of criminals' digital assets and restore those funds to victims. Mr. Goldberg refers to this earlier. 2 is to clarify and harmonize the duties that all companies have to protect customers from online scams and provide those companies with sufficient legal safe harbors to empower them to pursue those duties. That includes sharing actionable scam intelligence, both with each other and with relevant government agencies. 3 is to commit resources to make key federal criminal reporting and analysis systems fit for purpose and using the latest technology. And 4 is there is low-hanging fruit. There are things that you can do today, whether that is fixing the income tax burden on scam victims, commissioning a study for a national front door for reporting from computers, both companies and consumers, implementing the GAO reforms my colleagues just outlined, and investing in training for state, tribal, and local law enforcement, and providing them with greater resources to work effectively with victims. I'll close by saying that as alarmed as we are by the amount of household wealth that is being stolen, we are as inspired by the leaders who are stepping up to play critical roles in a whole of society response. Now is not the time to stop and pat ourselves on the back, though. Much hard work remains, and we must be clear-eyed that the goal is to disrupt this business model to fully reduce the number of victims who are losing their life savings to this terrible crime. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Mr. Stokes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to testify for this timely and important hearing. I'm Kathy Stokes. I'm the Senior Director of Fraud Prevention Programs with AARP. AARP represents 125 million older adults and their family members, and we deeply appreciate your attention to the surge of international scams targeting our nation's seniors. I think you've already heard this today. Fraud is a national crisis. I'm really glad that you also heard from the last 2 people that what we're looking at is somewhere around a $200 billion a year problem, more money than most companies will ever have. This is a national security crisis, and about close to half of that is coming from our nation's older adults. And we see it on the front lines. AARP Fraud Watch Network educates millions of people every year trying to get out the message of fraud prevention and promoting systemic change. We have a helpline that receives 500 calls a day from those reporting scams to those seeking help in the aftermath. And we also have support groups to help victims rebuild their lives. We hear in those support groups from people like Lori, an oncology account exec who fell in love with a man she first met when he reached out to her on LinkedIn to ask for advice about moving to her area. He spent months carefully grooming her. As her trust deepened, he asked for Lori's help, and she ended up loaning him $675,000, which included funds from her 401k. When she finally discovered it was a scam, of course, she was devastated. But then she learned that she'd have to pay $225,000 to the IRS in federal taxes on the money that was stolen from her. Because of that, she had to file Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Guess who was the first in line to get the payments? IRS. In addition to fraud prevention through education, AARP is leading an effort to change how we think about and talk about fraud victims. We call it Words Matter, to show that blaming victims has served all these years to deprioritize fraud as a crime. We're seeing real movement toward understanding that these are crimes and they aren't the fault of the victim. AARP is also very proud to be a founder of the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center, which is a public-private partnership to connect fraud intelligence through an organized crime lens to build high-value federal cases for investigation and prosecution. In a recent example of NEFCI's value, the nonprofit became the central orchestrator of a multi-million-dollar tech support and refund scheme. NEFCI identified that separate investigations from 4 FBI field offices were in fact part of the same organized network. With inputs from 17 private industry contributors, NEFCI's analytical groundwork helped turn seemingly disparate cases into a $55 million investigation. Transnational criminal organizations drive the expansion of this fraud. We've all heard this today. We hear about what's happening in Southeast Asia. We just have to remember that as many of those that are out there across our borders, they have thousands and thousands of people here aiding and abetting their activity. We're pleased to see solutions proposed by Congress, including the introduction of the GUARD Act, which seeks to improve the state and local response to fraud and better coordinate agency efforts and ensure law enforcement has the needed tools to combat these crimes. We also advocate for reinstating the personal casualty and theft loss deduction as the tax relief for victims of crimes, scams, and disaster acts would do. Victims like Lori, who owe taxes on stolen funds they no longer have, end up stuck with a tax bill they don't deserve and have no way to pay. They are re-victimized by the federal government. And there is no single solution, and I will say as an educator, I would be the first to say education is not the solution. It is part of the solution. But there are things we can do. We're educating individuals on what they can do to protect themselves and their loved ones. But industry must innovate on fraud controls and mitigation. Tech companies and telcos must build security into their products so they are secure by design and safe by default. And the financial services industry must do its part to stop their customers from being defrauded. Addressing fraud requires a whole-of-society approach. We cannot educate, engineer, regulate, or arrest our way out of the fraud crisis alone, but together, we can disrupt the fraud business model, protect millions of Americans, and safeguard our economy. Thank you for your leadership and commitment to protecting older Americans, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate the testimony, and I'm sorry for our first 2 witnesses. I came in the middle of Mr. Bagdoyan's testimony. I'll start with a round of questions, then I'll turn it over to the Congresswoman. Let me start with a question to you, Ms. Stokes, and I would say to our friends from AARP who are here today, too, it's very nice to see you all here, and I'm very grateful for the work that all of you are doing as AARP members to combat fraud. So as we've talked about, scams too often go unreported, and in some cases, scam victims are too ashamed to report these crimes, while others simply don't know where to turn. So, Ms. Stokes, you stated in your written testimony that, quote, it's important to streamline victim reporting, which is currently received by agencies on an agency-by-agency basis, leaving victims confused about who to report to, end of quote. As you know, Senator Scott and I are working to create a single centralized portal for Americans to report scams and get help. What challenges have you heard from older Americans about the federal government's many different ways to report scams, and how might a single centralized scams reporting portal help?
Thank you for the question. We hear it all the time. When people do have the sense that it's okay for them to report it, they often get turned away. They go to local law enforcement, and the person that they meet at that desk is probably not even a law enforcement agent, and says, well, you gave them your money, what do you want us to do with it? You know?
Right.
So they get pushed back. At the federal level, they try to report it to IC3, but then they don't know if anyone received it or not because there's no kind of a closure loop there. And then you look at the many agencies that says, no, report to us, report to us, report to us. It's confusing, and the data aren't being aggregated and looked at through that necessary organized crime lens to be able to do something meaningful. So a national center for everybody that knows, it's like the front door.
Yeah.
This is where you go. That would go a really long way. But we would also have to know that those reports are going to law enforcement and that they're hearing back that something is being done, even if they're not going to necessarily get their money back.
Got it. Thank you. Ms. Griffin, time is short when fighting scams, and companies on the front lines can be vital sources of actionable intelligence. However, there's no centralized mechanism to facilitate information sharing between the public and private sectors. We've talked about across agencies or law enforcement, but now we need to think about public and private. So there's also no organized government response that allows for quick action, like the prompt removal of scam websites, for example. At the Aspen Institute, you've worked with federal agencies as well as some of the nation's largest tech, telecoms, and retail companies. How can Congress help facilitate real-time information sharing between the private and public sectors? Are there lessons that we should take from other countries, such as Australia, about ways to work in a coordinated way across government and the private sector to fight these scams?
Yeah, that's really an important set of questions. I want to start by just saying this work on consumer reporting and company reporting are related.
Yeah.
One, we have nationally representative data sets that tell us that 1 in 17 victims will report to one of these federal law enforcement portals. 1 in 10 will go to the local law enforcement. Fully 70% of victims will tell their financial institution or the platform where they were scammed. Companies have incredibly useful scam intelligence, and they want to report. But right now, most of the ways that they have to report are too reliant on manual or even paper-based processes. So how do we create an ability, like having a single portal for consumers, that there's a single portal for companies to report in bulk? Right? It's aggregated cases. How do we ensure that when they're reporting in, who's receiving that information on the government side has the technology and the infrastructure that they need, modern technology, modern standards, to quickly analyze and use that data, and get it to the relevant law enforcement agencies? So we have both an important issue to direct agencies to either better cooperate or create kind of a portal on top of that, as well as resource it effectively with the most modern technology we have.
Okay, thank you. Quick question to you, Mr. Bagdoyan, and then we'll turn to the Congresswoman. As you mentioned, the Government Accountability Office has recommended that the United States develop a government-wide strategy to combat scams. To help address the federal government's current fragmented approach, my bipartisan legislation to prevent scams seeks to simplify the process for scam victims and ensure that federal agencies work in closer coordination with each other. What are the current gaps in the federal approach that a unified strategy could help address? Why is better coordination of expertise and resources at the federal level necessary to close those gaps?
Sure. Thank you for your question. Great question. I'm glad you asked it. What we saw for our during our review is 13 different agencies doing their own thing without really talking to each other, not really coordinated. They didn't respond to anything really proactively. There are a lot of risks out there that they haven't assessed or they don't even know about. And the issue of a single definition to guide all these efforts is vital.
Yeah.
So that's where it begins, and then you move into a strategic assessment of risks, prioritize them, figure out what controls are needed, who needs to participate in that story, and go from there. So congressional oversight, including legislation, is vital in that regard.
Well, thank you. Ms. Spartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually, it's very, you have good observations and have very similar observation, and I appreciate some input. I think, Mr. Bagdoyan from Government Accountability Office, I think, I had the same observation, that we don't really have a lead agency. You don't even have to really coordinate in these efforts, and, you do an audit of healthcare. That's good luck with that. And actually, your recent report showed that our federal government has $6 trillion in assets and $136 trillion in liabilities. And we have a big problem. I think no business with that balance sheet would ever get any funding. So we're in deep trouble. So there is a lot of work to do. But this is a material issue. And you mentioned that, FBI is really seems like volunteering to do it, to be a lead agency. From your perspective, is that the right approach to go through FBI? Because it's really accountable. I dealt with these issues, and we are trying to do something. What do you think is that the proper agency to take a lead? Because somebody has to take a lead. I think, Ms. Stokes, you said the same frustration you have with seniors. I have the same frustrations with a lot of constituents.
Yes, thank you for your question, Representative Spartz. We did, on balance, assess that FBI was best positioned, given its roles, responsibilities, its capabilities, especially internationally. They have undertaken other large-scale efforts throughout its history as an organization. So that is a starting point. They positioned themselves to become the lead agency. And frankly, some others demurred at the opportunity to become one of the lead agencies. We did direct some recommendations to FTC and CFPB. All three of them have responded, as I mentioned, in a mixed manner. So we are working and coordinating with them in follow-on work that we're doing for the Senate Aging and Senate Banking committees. I believe, Senator Hassan, you are a co-sponsor of that work. So we will see how they play out in terms of responding to our recommendations. They need to speed things up. As I mentioned, the risks posed by scammers are immediate, and we can't really afford a long time gap in responding to those.
Do you think they need to have a different structure within the agency to dedicate resources specifically with this? Because it seems like they have a lot of things on their plate. Is it something structural, need to be structural changes to have a dedicated?
Yes. So in their initial response, they have mentioned creating a special working group. I don't know whether that's going to lead to any restructurings, either at the FBI or any of the other lead agencies, but that could be part of the solution. But to their credit, they did mention that there would also need to be some significant legislative and regulatory changes as well, which, of course, the legislative changes would begin in Congress. So they are thinking along the right paths in some respects, but as I noted, that the issue of definition, if you don't know what you're going to fight, you're not going to be able to craft a strategy.
Well, I think the problem is the experience with all of this stuff. I mean, this is my third in Congress and a long-term Congress, and everyone's still talking about a lot of issues. That's a challenge, and I think, Mr. Baker, I'll turn to you. I think you've been in government before, now you're looking from outside, and I had the same when, everyone is doing databases and data collections and issuing reports, and no actions are taking reports for years, and we have truly big problems, so we need to go beyond the reports and actually start picking issues and do it. So from your perspective, perspective, Mr. Baker, what would you do? And you're familiar from inside looking at a lot of these agencies, you work for the government, and then looking from outside and see what innovative things are happening and solutions, because we will need to bring them to help us, because these people have lots of money to innovate doing fraud. So if we don't come with innovation to combat it, it's not going to work. So how would you envision that integration of maybe government with some innovations and businesses and industry happen and other tools? And would you think that would be handled the best at FBI level or some other agency?
So the FBI is the most international and the broadest national law enforcement agency. I do question how much value we're getting out of law enforcement in this area. You know, when you report a car stolen to the police, you expect to get the car back. Nobody's getting their money back. And I think Senator Hassan really identified solutions here which are preventing the money from leaving at all. And that clearly is better than trying to chase it afterwards. But if we're going to chase it afterwards, we need to create incentives for people to turn in the people they know who have the money. So finding ways to say, you know, if you can identify some of the proceeds of these frauds, off in cryptocurrency land, and tell us how we can get hold of it, we will give you 20%, 25% of the money and give the rest to the victims. I just think that the idea that we're going to get there by prosecuting people in Burma is, maybe it'll work, but I think that's sort of second or third tier as a solution.
Thank you. Hilbeck.
Well, thank you. I have a couple more questions. Mr. Bagdoyan, in its work on federal scam prevention efforts, the Government Accountability Office has expressed concern about the lack of a government-wide definition of scams. You have talked about that, and inconsistent data collection across agency. The legislation I'm working on, bipartisan legislation, seeks to address those challenges. Why hasn't the federal government developed a uniform definition of scams as well as a standard method to track them? In your view, has this prevented the U.S. from accurately capturing the scale of the scams threat?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with your second point and your first point. I'll be perfectly candid here. It's just lack of interest. You know, it's considered to be a heavy lift to figure out what constitutes a scam. We use the Federal Reserve's definition. It's simple: the use of manipulation or deception intended to achieve financial gain. And there's a whole analytical backstory to that, to categorize scams by type and then analyze how risky they are and associate costs with them. So there is something in place already that can be adopted and adapted as part of a government-wide strategy. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay, because in response to the recommendations coming out of your office, we've seen some federal agencies argue that it would be difficult somehow to establish a uniform definition or standardized tracking method. Do you have a more, specific response to their concerns? You've just outlined what a good definition would be, and we have the power to adapt it, obviously.
Well, they need to have the will to do it, to tackle it, basically. I mean, we offered a definition that exists from a highly respected institution, Federal Reserve. They put a task force together to come up with this approach. It's called the scam classifier model. It is a starting point. It may not be the end all, but it is a starting point that may lessen the burden on the other agencies that are skeptical about coming up with a common definition.
Well, thank you for that. One more question, and then I'll turn it to the chair. To Ms. Griffin and Ms. Stokes, each of your organizations have made detailed recommendations on the best way to address the growing danger of scams and protect Americans. Can each of you describe, in your view, the single most important action that Congress can take to advance these efforts? And are there other areas related to scams you'd like to raise that we haven't covered yet in this hearing? So I'll start with you, Ms. Griffin.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I really do believe that a mechanism or an elevation of this issue to congressional leadership so that you can start to coordinate across committee silos is incredibly important.
Yep.
It mirrors both what the private sector knows that it needs to do, and we're starting to see emerge, as well as what the administration directed in the executive order. And so beginning to organize yourselves in that same way to be able to respond and prioritize is important. I think the other most important critical thing I can state is that what we see in the private sector is a variety of different incentives for each sector to participate in scam prevention. Because there are different revenue models and different regulatory environments for each sector, they're both responding to those pressures. So looking uniformly across that to clarify the duties and responsibilities of each sector in scam prevention is a critical, important step. And alongside of that, to say to each sector, here are your responsibilities, here are the safe harbors you have when you act within those responsibilities so that you take those actions and you have freedom from liability if you get it wrong.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Stokes?
Thank you for the question. I think that we really need a national fraud strategy with a single person as the fraud czar that coordinates everything. And one other thing I would think that is important, and it gets to something that Chairman Schweiker had said, how do you stop the money from leaving the account to begin with? I think we have to go back a little bit into the scam ecosystem, and it's like, let's not let those calls get to us. Let's not let those text messages get to us. AARP does a ton of research. We're ready to put some more out, and we were arguing over whether we should call people picking up the telephone risky behavior.
Wow.
That is not risky behavior.
Right, right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great panel, and Mr. Chair.
You know, she may have just become my new best friend.
I know.
And I thought Mr. Baker was going to be. I mean, all right. And thank you for everyone on the panel. I know we're running late. I appreciate. So I'm going to do, instead of my whole series of questions, let's just go to the punchline. How do I stop my brothers and sisters from being exploited? How do we stop money going out to finance, functionally, what is slavery in some of these overseas scam farms? If any of you dug in and read some of the international stories of the recent border skirmishes and those things between Thailand and Myanmar, and some of these scam farms that the Thailand military actually invaded and took over. It was horrific. We're financing that. You would think there would be a level of moral outrage, let alone, our families being taken care of, but also the money being used to destroy and exploit individuals. So, Mr. Baker, I'm going to start with you. Look, you were kind enough to sort of approach my Mark bill, which was just trying to say it's already in the U.S. Constitution. Apparently, we've had presidents use it before. I have an entire book on Thomas Jefferson's use of the Mark provisions in the U.S. Constitution to allow privateers to go stop those who were raiding our ships and raiding our cargo. And yes, you're right. We probably need to have a definition of what the privateers, we call them white hat hackers in the real world, are able to take, but then the rest of the money goes back to the exploited party.
Yeah, I think it's worth trying. If you pass that bill, it would authorize the government to do this, and you could see how it worked. And the government's, the Justice Department is not enthusiastic about this, so they're going to be cautious about using the authority. But I see very little downside to trying it under some careful constraints. The other thing I would think about is I've been listening to this, and I listened to the success that the Chinese had in making sure that these scammers who had been scamming mostly Chinese people shifted their attention to the United States.
In Europe.
Yes, and the way they did that is the way they essentially engaged in covert action against these scam centers. They paid people, they armed people to go in and knock them over. Well, it's not like this is unknown to the United States either. And we should ask the question, are we prepared to actually encourage Burmese military, paramilitaries, or the Thai military, with which we have a pretty good relationship, to be more aggressive and to take along U.S. advisors to see if we can't take down these centers and seize the evidence and use it against them. It'll drive the Chinese crazy because this is their backyard, but that's probably a reason to do it, not to withhold ourselves.
Actually, might be one of the few occasions in life where we could actually partner with some of the regional powers to stop this.
Okay.
Anyone on the panel here, and I know Ms. Griffin actually had some ideas around this, technology, so if I came to you right now and said, okay, do we have technology to stop this? Do we have to provide some tort protection for the provider of the technology if there's the 1 in 1,000 where someone had a legitimate transaction and it got stalled because of the protections? Is there a know your customer a mechanism that could ever be adopted, saying in the purchasing at the crypto machine, instead of, because my bank has to have some of these levels? If I came to any of you and said, give me the technology, give me the policy sets, give me the legal framework that the money never leaves the account, because the pay and chase model drives me insane, what would we do?
Congressman, I have 70 pages of recommendations for you.
I am surprised. Okay, we all knew that was coming. I just said.
But essentially, I wish that there was a single silver bullet to give to you. Unfortunately, what has happened is that these criminals are exploiting multiple holes in our systems, and we have to go fix them all. I think the technology exists in many places to solve this, but we need to empower the private sector to use it and scale it, and to work effectively with government to do that, so that it is harder for criminals to impersonate someone else, to open a social media account, to get the SIM card, to send the message, and to ask for the funds to be received. At every step in that process, there is technology to be deployed. And there, in many of those cases, is a way that we need to use policy to make it easier, or to empower the private sector to do that at scale.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would offer, I'm sorry, Ms. Stokes, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to remark that we've allowed this to happen over the last quarter century or more by being complacent, by assuming that only people who aren't smart were getting scammed, older people because they had cognitive decline. We're not going to solve this with one big solution. We have to have many, and I think a lot of them that we've talked about today and that we heard on the prior panel can get us there, but we have to do a lot of work to catch up because of how long we've just let this go.
Look, we have a family saying, and it's always dangerous when someone starts saying we have a family saying, for every complex problem, there's a simple solution. That's absolutely wrong. Yeah. And the concept is complexity requires complex solutions, and that's how you fix things.
Yes, sir.
You had one.
Yes, so I mean, I will go back to my bread and butter, which is a strategic approach. All these things that we've talked about, you've talked about, Senator has talked about, Representative Sparks has talked about, and other dais members talked about, you have to have an organizing principle. You have to figure out what it is that you're countering, assess its risks, figure out, quantify those risks, figure out what is being done, is it effective, where the gaps are, I believe, as Ms. Griffin mentioned, and figure out the solutions. Technology is part of it, organizational restructuring, regulatory reform, statutory reform, all those are part of the solution. But it's going to take time, which we don't really have, because, as Ms. Stokes mentioned, we've neglected this for a long time, and it's built up a head of steam that is being fully enabled by AI, You know, these bad guys out there are operating, as I said, at the speed of light, and we are pretty much crawling.
And you just gave me my closing remarks.
Happy to
is
do
my
that.
habit. Back in January, God, I think it was December or January, we sat down with a couple freakishly smart folks that were really from the AI world. And their opinion was the scam farms are old school, that there will be such good technology here this year, and you'll be able to buy it on the dark web, that you can just set up a proxy server that is your scam farm, the natural language, the ability to crawl through social media, to make phone calls. It will be nothing, and you basically, it's a hard drive with a really great internet connection, is now the scam industry. That terrifies me. And it will be scams that I don't think any of us were prepared for. We had the gentleman who had built a specialty of when there was denial of accesses or a pipeline that had been locked out of its computers, and had built a way to crack those codes. Very soon, that will become almost impossible. You know, where technology is leading us. We're going to have to find and come to a bipartisan agreement where in some ways we make everything possible, because today's solution will be wrong tomorrow, but there'll be something else that will replace it. Can you create enough optionality so we're defending our citizens? And it enrages me we don't even see this as a multinational, because our citizens aren't the only ones in the world being exploited. I appreciate this hearing. The Mark bill was the first step in trying to help socialize, if I can use that word, the concept that it's in our Constitution, having a private sector solution, because these are the people you hire if you're a company and want to find out if you can be exploited. Why wouldn't we use that same technology and talent to protect our citizens? And with that, I need to warn you, you may, over the next week or two, get letters from us asking questions. The responses to those questions will become part of the permanent testimony. If you also have any last documents you'd like to send either the Democrat or Republican teams here, we would like to have those things, and we will also add those to the permanent record of this hearing. Thank you for being here. Hearing is closed.
Thank you.